going to do is start off by going back to some of your earliest memories of your mother. Yeah, that's back. That's back quite a while. Is there any scene or picture you can paint of an early memory of your mother?
My mother, to me, was she was tall and muscular. But that's not what I remember most when I think of a childhood memory. Is I remember walking down the street with my mother, and she would be wearing African garb and her hair was natural, and I was about 8 or 9, and we would play Don't Step on the Cracks. But truthfully, what I mostly remember about my mother is in school. The fact that she would come to school wearing her African clothes and her hair natural. And some idiot kid in the class would say, "Your mama from Lost Africa." And I'd have to pop him. And generally, he was generally bigger than I was, so I would take the most of the beating, even though I would start it. And then I would come home and I would ask my mother, I remember this, we laugh about this. I said, "Don't you have a sweater skirt outfit? Can't you do one of those pennies things?" And she would say to me, "This is your history. You come from kings and queens as well." And I would look at her and I would think, yes, it's unfortunate. My mother's demented. It's really too bad. The old girl has just lost it. But I didn't know she was a pioneer then. I didn't know what she saw of the future. Because I was a prisoner of the media and the ignorance of the time. I didn't know where the truth was. And so I used to think my family was right. Because my family would say, "Your mama crazy, boy. Your mama crazy. I like her, but she crazy." And I would have to think they were right. But fortunately, life has shown that she had the right vision. And as Chinua Achebe says, a good human being is not a prisoner of their time.
Describe growing up with your mother and your grandmother, in that sometimes your mother wasn't there, so it was your grandmother. Were they similar or different in what they taught you?
They were totally different. My grandmother's attitude about things was, as long as you're doing what's right and what you think is right, you're doing what you're supposed to do. And my mother was more politically involved. She was more concerned with justice. And see, my grandmother and my grandfather were basically they weren't gangsters, but they were close to it. They carried guns. And my mother is not into guns. Or she wasn't at that time. And there was a harder reality in my grandmother's life. they came out of a time that was fraught with hate and racial segregation. So they had a different perspective. My mother's attitude was all humans have something in common. And so her friends were from everywhere. And while my grandparents weren't racist, most of their friends, 99% of their friends were black. But my mother's friends came from everywhere. So I got a whole different perception from her.
When your mother married Todd, stay there, both of your lives changed. And your mother said to me that Vivian Baxter was not initially pleased that she was marrying a white man, and race relations being what they were at that time. What did you think of Tosh?
That was my mother's choice. It wasn't mine. But he was a decent person. He played saxophone. Not particularly well, but he got me interested in music. They lived out at Hunters Point at the time. I was 8, and Hunters Point was all black and just, what are those metal, Quonset. We lived in a Quonset hut. And Hunters Point was one of the roughest areas.
Explain Quonset.
Quonset is that rippled, round, half-shaped building that came out of World War II. Metal, uninsulated, as I recall. And Hunters Point was the roughest area in San Francisco. Fillmore and Hunters Point were the areas if you wanted live action. And we lived out there then. And so having a white father meant I did a lot more fighting. I hesitate to think that that's my personality. I rather think it was the circumstances that I was in. But it seemed like I fought a lot. But then again, I had a mouth that wouldn't stop. So that often led to fights. And then, of course, my mother was always the strangest person on the scene. And that gave it some difficulty.
And apparently she missed it too, because one of the things she said to us was when she came home, the reunion was so sweet that she came home and there you were. She also tells the story of a time when, I'm thinking Wilkie had to help her, because she tells this story of a time, she tells it in the book and she told it on tape to us, when she had to ask you to stay in the house, and she felt like she might have harmed you or herself. You remembering this story?
Not at all.
Because she felt like, I've got to raise a black son, and I don't know what I'm doing at this point. And she went to see a psychologist, walked up to the place, demanded to see somebody, and asked for help. And they didn't understand what she was going through.
That's a maternal story. I ain't got anything on that. What I do know is that Frederick Wilkerson was her voice coach, and he would have her singing notes all day long. But Frederick Wilkerson was around at the same time Billie Holiday was around. And I have much better memories of Billie Holiday. I mean, I recall her more clearly and more defined than I do Frederick Wilkerson.
Well, tell us about Billie.
Well, we lived in Laurel Canyon, and we had about 10 acres for a backyard. and we had a massive Rottweiler that weighed about 125 pounds. My mother would go to work every night about 8:30. It would take her about an hour and a half to get to work because Laurel Canyon is not exactly in the middle of the center of things. And she would be singing Redondo Beach, places that were drives away. And she would leave about 8:30 and come home. And then one time she came home with Billie Holiday. And Billie Holiday, I knew her music because we played Al Hibbler. We played Billie Holiday. We played all the old singers of the time. The names elude me. But when she brought Billie Holiday home, Strange Fruit was the huge song at the time. And I asked her to sing it. And she sang it for me. And it's a song that tugged at my heart, particularly when my family was able to, when they explained it to me, what it was about. But the other image I have of Billie Holiday was her dog drank too. Billie used to come with a bottle of whatever she drank, I don't remember what it was, and she would pour a shot of it for her little Chihuahua, or whatever it was. It wasn't a Chihuahua, but it was some miniature dog. And it used to really astound me that the dog would just be lying there hiccuping on its side. I thought it was a drunk barking rat is really what I thought, but, I never said that to her. Anyways, for me, what it was is that she was a tragic figure because my mother would tell me after she left that she had been used and abused. And part of her angst and sadness had to do with the things she experienced in her life. Well, Billie was really my first exposure to people who had been using drugs and had been in that part of the life. I didn't know at that time that other members of my family were also traveling that path. But she was my first exposure to it.
Wasn't there an incident that happened then where she came into your bedroom, Billie Holiday, and your mother describes it in the book that you got upset about something?
No, I don't. I think the only difference I had with Billie Holiday was Billie Holiday cursed considerably and cursed a lot, and MF this and SOB that and all of that. And quite frankly, in my family, when people started cursing, generally people got shot. So cursing was generally an indication of violence to come. That's the way I saw it. And so I didn't like it. I don't really know how she got into it. But she met Dr. King. I don't even know how. You'll have to ask her how she met Dr. King. But all I know is that she got the job with Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Harlem. And it was a crazy time in Harlem. Mr. Michaud's bookshop was on 125th. He'd have 500 people out in front of his bookshop as they'd be talking. And I didn't know it was the precursor to Malcolm. I didn't know that. Nobody really heard of Elijah Muhammad in those days. He was just rising. And so I remember Castro came to town. And he stayed at the Teresa, the Hotel Teresa in Harlem, which is like 2.5 blocks from the Southern Christian Leadership Office, and about 3 blocks from where Mr. Michaud's bookshop. So it's right in the middle of everything. So, of course, my mother gets to meet them. And that's where we met Carlos Moore. Do you know who Carlos Moore is? That's when we met Carlos Moore during those times. And it was an amazing period. I was in a thing called the Human Relations Club in high school. And my mother said to me, if you really feel that you have something to protest, you should be on the streets. You should be on the streets. So I joined CORE. Then we were doing a lot of the anti-nuclear stuff at the time, so I joined SANE. And I was a member of the NAACP. But the year that we went down to work on part of the SNCC Constitution, the NAACP was red baiting. So we had a student walkout of the NAACP National Conference. Boy, what times.
Explain for our younger audience red baiting.
Okay. Red baiting is when we were just coming out from under the shadows of the House of Un-American Activities. And so being a communist was a terrible thing, probably the worst thing you could call a person. And it had nothing to do with the philosophy. It was just, oh, those are the enemy. And so when they went after people who were communist in the NAACP, it was antithetical to the NAACP. Come on. It wasn't only colored people. It sounded like they were making it for certain people, you know. So we walked out, and it was during this time my mother led the demonstration after Lumumba was killed. And after that demonstration, I wasn't with her on that. That was when she went to the United Nations. The one I was with her on, and I'll just want to tell this story. I don't really remember what the actual issue was, but we were protesting the damage being done to people in the South who had gone down there for the freedom rides. And in those days, if you had a march, you needed a parade license. And if you didn't get a parade license, the police, mounted police, would run you down. And they did this a number of times. My mother was leading this demonstration, and I was with her. And we had about 400 people, maybe 5. And we were marching. I don't really remember where we were marching. I think we were somewhere in Harlem. And 3 blocks away, the mounted police pull into the street in formation. And they come not at a trot, but at a walk toward us. People in the demonstration began going to the sidewalk. They got about 2 blocks away, and about half the people were gone. And I was looking at my mother, and we kept on. And it was about a block, maybe a block and a half, and I said, "Ma, let's go." She looked at me, and we kept walking. about a block. I said, "Ma, come on, let's go." They'd entered the block. They were about a block from us. And I said, "Ma, come on, you're going to get us killed. Let's go." She turned to me and she said, "One person standing on the word of God is the majority." I looked at her and I thought, you really have gone crazy. You've gone crazy. That's what I was thinking. But because my mother was there, I couldn't go anywhere. I was forced to stay with her. So we kept walking. By the time the police got to us, there was probably 8 or 9 people out of the 400 behind us. Because there were only 8 or 9 people, the police, walked past us. They started to walk past us. The sergeant in charge was walked past. My mother pulled out this big hairpin out of her headband and stuck it in the sergeant's horse. The sergeant's horse neighed and reared up. The sergeant fell off. The police went in chaos. With the sergeant off, people jumped off their horses. The people came back from off the sidewalk, and we finished that march. I hadn't seen courage like that brought right up to my face. Because in those days, they ran over people. They stomped them, trampled them, and left their bodies in the street. Whew. She took me on a trip or two. Taught me a little bit about courage. I have it in my heart. Carlos Moore called me yesterday, 2 days ago, and said he wanted to do a story about negritude, Pan-Africanism, and the Civil Rights Movement. And there was only one person who was in the middle of all three. It was my mother. When I think of where she put me and what she exposed me to, I know that I lived a blessed life.
Katherine, Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T, Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share with non-white people, victims of white supremacy, constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, February 13, 2025. So I have been told. This is our 8th and final study session on the late Grandsister, Dr. Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman. We are picking up on chapter 18, retired firefighter in Florida. He said, "Hey, Carlos Moore, that's my homie. We kick it all the time." Picking up on chapter 18, the installment that we heard at the beginning, that was the late Guy Johnson. That was a little lengthy, but I thought it was worth it because, this is almost like a co-autobiography of Guy Johnson. So I thought it was, just to give him time to kind of give some of his reflections on his late mother and all of these experiences that were captured in the book. You got to hear some of his thoughts on Billie Holiday. That was from April 22nd, 2014, the PBS American Masters series on his mother. It's like a 90-minute interview, maybe even a little longer than that. Interestingly, he said that he was talking about his grandmother, and she said that she lived in a time that was fraught with hate and racial segregation. Said, what time is not fraught with hate and racial segregation? I just saw Snoop Dogg and Tom Brady on TV at the Super Bowl talking about no hating, don't be hating, don't be hating. And then he said that his grandparents weren't racist, but most of their friends, like 99% of them, were black. It suggested to me, like, dang, black people can be racist against white people. Confusion is lethal, and he does have a white parent. Oh my goodness. When I saw this video, I think I said something last week, it almost felt as though Dr. Angelou was deliberately deceptive. She had a passage in this book talking about where her son was teased for acting white in his grammar. She does not mention anything about his skin complexion. He is so pale. You heard him talking about having a white parent. I certainly suspect, highly suspect, that some of he said he had to fight in all this. Maybe he mouthed off a lot and was a smart aleck, but I am pretty sure skin complexion being the problem that it is all the time. You old highly yellow and who you think you is and all the rest. I am certain that that was a part of it, especially if he might have been accused of acting white or anything of the sort. His having a white father, I'm sure, was a part of it. You heard him mention that his mother's had friends that came from everywhere, white dad, commune, blah, blah, blah. He mentioned staying in Hunters Point and the Fillmore. Oh my goodness. I was just right there. The Fillmore is Jim Jones' People's Temple. Hunters Point, that's where some of the zebra murders went down. I was going to Hunters Point on Veterans Day in November when I was there in San Francisco, but it rained. They have remodeled. They have massive, what they call racial gentrification, aka racial dislocation. They call it gentrification, racial dislocation. We even had a C.O.W.S investor who said, man, they booted so many Leroy, said they was smoking reefer, and arrested them and invested I think like $60 million in a big public park in Hunters Point after they got rid of all the niggers. Come on. Anywho, unless I'm misinformed, dogs should not consume alcohol. They do not have the ability to metabolize. And then that anecdote about going out to protest with his mom and she jabbed the horse with her pen. One, you could be killed for that even today. Cruelty to a police officer, that's what they'll say the horse is. Two, in all of that, I thought, wow, just like with Buddy from a couple weeks back, she could have got him killed, and then for what? That's the same thing I heard with that, and when he said that she had so much courage to go and jab that horse with her hairpin and all of that, VGQ. But that has come up before in this text, that term courage. It reminded me of the late Grandcester Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, the second book that we read on the C.O.W.S book club. She writes, and fantasy it was, for we were not strong, only aggressive. We were not free, merely licensed. We were not compassionate, we were polite. Not good, but well behaved. We courted death in order to call ourselves brave. Brave, courageous. We courted death in order to call ourselves brave and hid like thieves from life. That is the second time while reading this book the word courage has come up, and that's what I have been reminded of both times. We courted death in order to call ourselves brave, courageous. Black people do a lot of reckless things. Call it courageous. Reckless meaning not well thought out. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy, audio segment 1.
Chapter 18. 1 week later, Vuz returned from Addis Ababa. He asked what had happened in his absence. I reported on my work and that David had found another way for me to supplement my salary. I had agreed to write commentary for Radio Egypt, and I would be paid £4 for a review and an extra £1 for each one I narrated. Guy had earned acceptable grades on recent tests and had generously spent more time at home while Vuz was away. I also told Vuz about the women's party and Medina. He accepted my news and told me dryly of his trip. The once exotic names no longer titillated me, and Vuz had long since stopped trying to enchant me with tales of his perilous exploits. We returned to the sequence of our lives. Work occupied our days, and parsimonious love-making ended some stolid nights. The news spread in the African diplomatic corps that Medina was a slut, a hussy, a whore, a home-breaking harlot. The rumor was hot oil poured into the ears of the African women who had admired her. She had sought appointments with her ambassadors. 3 had reported to their wives that the pretty woman offered them her favors in return for money. In weeks, she had cut a lascivious swath between members of the diplomatic corps and their wives. Her name became an alarm, forcing my female friends to assemble and close ranks against the dangerous intruder. She would never be invited to another woman's home. She would be turned away from every door and not addressed on the street. The husbands who had fallen for her charms would be dealt with in the privacy of their marriages, but her blatant disrespect of the African wives had to have public penalty. 2 months passed, and for the African community, Medina disappeared, lost her name, had no presence. Then one evening, an Egyptian woman, a close acquaintance of the African women, gave a party. Vuz and I arrived late. When we entered the first room, the informal lounge, Bandy, Kebi, and 7 ladies already sat on the sofas, their multicolored dresses radiant against dark brown skin. They greeted Vuz, who responded and continued into the salon, where more guests stood talking. I stopped to exchange regards with my friends and the other ladies I had come to know and like. Our small talk was suddenly pierced by, "Good evening, Mrs. Make." The sound was disquietingly familiar. I looked up and saw Medina in the arched doorway leading to a hall passage. She was standing by a record player. I nodded to her, and she lifted the machine's arm, stopping the music. When she turned her fabulous body to face me, I saw again the cunning face, the small hint of cruelty. "Mrs. Make, Mr. Make has been trying to reach me all day long. He called all over Cairo trying to get my number." Her words, voice, and intent were pitiless, and for seconds my heart opposed its natural function. She poked her voice easily through my entire body. When he finally reached me, he said he had to talk to me, to see me about something very important. As she glanced at the seated women, I gritted my teeth and held on to the sternness of my long-dead grandmother. I refused to let him come to my apartment. Her eyes hurriedly returned to fasten on me. Then he said it had to do with you, that you needed someone to help you at the office. I have been looking for a job, you know. Again, her eyes rushed to the African women and quickly back to me. Nothing happened. No angel came to take me up to a deserved heaven. No one shook my shoulder to awaken me from the immobilizing nightmare. No one moved. I raked through my mind, gathering every shred of skill, art, and craftiness, and stepped toward her. "Medina?" I kept my voice soft and haughty. She looked up into my face as I approached. "I am Medina, Mrs. Mate." The tone of her response was sassy. "And were you willing to work for me? At a very high salary? With an allowance for rent and possibly your own car? Were you willing?" Deceit left her face, and suddenly she became a young girl who could have been my baby sister. Her defenses were down. She was vulnerable, and I thrust at her with all my will. "Unfortunately, the job has been filled, but if it had not, dear Medina," I was still speaking low, "you would never do. You are ignorant, and you are a tramp." I gave her a filthy smile and walked past her into the salon. Luckily, a row of chairs was lined against a near wall. I went directly to a seat. Wind and pride had left my body. My stomach felt empty and my head light. I sat erect from habit and early training. Bandy and Kebi rushed in and took seats beside me. Bandy took my right hand and Kebi the other. They both murmured consolation. You were wonderful, sister, wonderful. That was Bandy. You made me proud of you, Maya. Kebby squeezed my hand. You look like a queen mother, a princess. Don't cry. Not now. You have handled it. It is over. Bandy leaned toward me, forcing me to look in her serious face. Sister, you will be avenged. Not to worry. You know what old man say in my country? She had slipped from standard English into the melodic Liberian country accent. Old man say, if you mess with Jesus Christ, God will make you shit. She nodded her head, asserting her own affirmation. The blasphemy and humor struck me at the same time. I was shocked and tickled. To arrange in the same sentence God, Jesus Christ, righteousness, revenge, and the word shit was so incongruous I was startled away from the humiliation of Mindina's announcement. Both friends' faces were solemn with concern. Both heads bobbed in agreement with Bandy's old man's wisdom. At last I nodded, smiled, and rose. V.O.S. was standing alone near a distant window. Ah, my dear. Nice party, isn't it? V.O.S., who is that girl playing records over there? He turned and looked straight at Mindina, whose profile was distinct against the white walls. V.O.S. shook his head. I don't know. No. Shaking his head, his eyes dark with puzzlement. V.O.S., you know her. Don't lie. At least don't lie. He twisted toward me, sudden recognition smoothing the planes of his face. Oh, say, is that Mindina you were telling me about? I wanted to slap him until he snapped and split open like popcorn. I walked away. I wasn't sure what God would do if someone messed with his only son, nor how I would fare when I dropped the obeisant attitude of an accepting wife and allowed my Black American femaleness to emerge. The silent ride home seemed endless. V.O.S. drove slowly, letting the old rickety car choose its own speed. When we were at last in the apartment, I checked Guy's room and found him asleep. That part of my life was comfortably accounted for. Now all I had to do was face my lover and one-time love, whom I heard dragging furniture around in the living room. I went into our bedroom and stood in the dark, wondering how to begin. Maya, don't go to bed yet. I walked out and down the hall. The big man sat composed and had arranged a chair to face him. Sit down here, Maya. I want to talk to you about Mindina and all the others. There was a moment's relief. At least I didn't have to start the conversation. That brief easement was pushed away with Anne. Abysmal fear. If he insisted that I accept his infidelity, I'd have to leave him. Condoning it would increase the misdeed. I had heard of men who brought other women into their homes, into the beds they shared with their wives. If V.O.S. was planning such flagrancy, I would have to pick up my son and my heels and get on the road one more time. I sat facing him, our knees touching. I am a man, an African man. I am neither primitive nor cruel. A nation of interlopers and most whites in the world would deny me on all counts, but let me deal with each of those stated conditions. It was going to be a long night. A man requires a certain amount of sexual gratification, much more than a woman needs, wants, or understands. That's a lie, V.O.S. You're not a woman. How do you know what I need? I do not choose to argue a point which cannot be proved, but which is tacitly agreed upon. I will continue. As an African man, in my society, I have the right to marry more than one woman. But that is not true in my society, and you knew that when we met. I met you in the U.S. He smiled. But now we are in Africa. Was he implying that geography affected his gonads? I reminded him that he had been unfaithful in New York. He looked shocked. You have no evidence of that. He was almost correct. I had only the lingering scent of perfume and the unforgotten cosmetics on his clothes. When I said nothing, he relaxed and leaned back in his chair, spreading his vast thighs. To an African man, the act of sex is only important as long as it lasts. It is not the factor which holds a family together. It pleases and relieves tension so that one can get about the business of living. I asked with sarcastic sweetness, and what about African women? Don't they want pleasure and release? He frowned, offended. Haven't I always satisfied you? Have I ever left you wanting? I have come home many nights, physically drained and abstracted with my work, but I have done my duty to you. Deny that if you can. The conversation was getting away from me. Onus and guilt were shifting into my lap where they surely didn't belong. I don't love you anymore, Vooz. It was the truth, but I used it not for declaration, so much as to startle him and take back a little advantage. He stayed at ease. I know that, my dear. I've known it for a long time. Nor am I any longer in romantic love with you. However, we respect and admire each other. We have the asset of mutual goals, the struggle for freedom, loyalty to Mother Africa. He paused for a second, then went on in a softer voice. And Guy's future as an African man. At that second, I hardened my heart. I didn't believe all the legitimizing drivel Vooz concocted about African male infidelity, and I would not allow him to teach such nonsense to my son. What about Mendina? Tell me about her. Tell me why you put my name into your mouth when all you wanted was to get her in bed. I apologize to you for that. Sincerely. His quick mind served him quickly. Although I did hear you say you wish there was another black woman in your office. There have always been, for me, periods and arguments when my thoughts swirl around in semi-solid circles, leaving no protruding phrase for my mind to grab. I am rendered mute until the eddying jumble slows down and I am able to pick out enough words to form a first sentence. The moment had come. Ideas rush around like crazed children in a mad tag game. Vooz was African and his values were different from mine. Among the people I knew, my family and friends, promiscuity was the ultimate blow in a marriage. It struck down the pillars of trust which held the relationship aloft. It was also physically dangerous. Venereal diseases could easily be the result of indiscreet momentary gratification. It was disloyal and finally unfriendly. Nor was it a characteristic solely of African men. From the beginning of human history, all societies had tried to cope with the custom. The Judeo-Christian Bible forbade adultery for both sexes. Usually, however, women paid the highest price, losing their hair to rough barbers or their lives to an affronted community that stoned them to death. In the United States, white men, with the implements of slavery and racial oppression, had taken from black men their names, languages, power, wives, daughters, innate senses of self-value, their confidence. Because they had been unable, however, to kill the sexuality, white men began to envy it, extol it, adore, and fear it. A number of black men, finding that they had one thing left which was beyond the reach of their enemies' grasp, commenced to identify themselves as sexual masters, possessors of the big dicks, the artful penises, the insatiable lust. White men greedily and enviously agreed. White women, in secret fantasies and rare public displays, yearned over the huge private parts. Some black women agreed that black men had rapacious appetites and allowed their husbands and lovers the freedom of the fields. Some other women, with knives and guns, boiling water, poison, and the divorce courts proved that they did not agree with the common attitude. Mendina. It is said that she is a sexual glutton. Women like that are only good for one, at most 2 experiences. He had been talking for some time. I suddenly remembered the drone of his voice. The men who have spoken about her consider her a pretty but temporary vessel. I nodded, assured. I had finally found my words. I'm leaving you, Vooz. I'm not sure when or where I'm going, but I'm leaving you. His face didn't change from the placid sheet of control when I got up and went to bed. Bandy's telephone call at my office came unexpectedly. I had gone to her house early the morning following the Mendina incident and told her of my plans to leave Vooz. Her response had been that of a wife who had a faithful husband. Sister, you have been a giant. Everyone admires your patience. Truly, you have proved yourself. With my decision made, the burden of tolerance lifted, and the approval of my friend, I had gone to work buoyant. Sister, I heard her say on the telephone, Joe and I want you to come to us this evening. After dinner, 9 o'clock. Will you? I agreed. The day rushed along. Entire paragraphs leaped out of my typewriter, needing little, if any, revision. V.O.S. didn't appear for dinner, so Guy and I ate alone. He was reading, so was happy to hear that I had an appointment and he would have the house quiet and to himself. The heavy door of the Liberian residency was opened by a servant. I stepped into the foyer and heard a cloud of low voices. Bandy hadn't advised me to dress for a party. But then the tone wasn't party-like. I walked past the doorman to paces, and I was at the door of the salon, where a multitude of faces peered at me. It was a surprise birthday party, months off schedule and lacking the gaiety of a fete. About 20 people sat in a crescent of chairs. Kebby, Jara, and Bandy were together. I hastily examined the familiar faces and felt that I had stumbled, unluckily, into a secret ritual or a dangerous kangaroo court. No one smiled, not even my friends, and the awkward moment could have lasted forever. Joe Williamson's high melodic voice preceded his presence. Sister Maya, we are waiting for you. Come in. Come in. Abdul will bring you a drink. Come, you are to sit beside Brother V.O.S. My eyes followed the general indication of his right hand. V.O.S. sat, stiff and sober, at the center of the row of chairs. I knew that I was befuddled, thrown, and totally mystified, so I smiled and obeyed. Joe's directive, finding an empty seat beside my husband. The low thrumming of voices did not stop. I leaned toward V.O.S. and whispered, "What is this? What's happening?" He gave me a calm look and said, "This is all for you." There was only weariness in his tone. Brothers and sisters. Joe walked in the center of the floor. You know why you are here. I was handed a drink of scotch. Our sister from across the seas and across the centuries is planning to leave our brother from South Africa. Damn. V.O.S. knew it, I knew it, and I had told Bandy a few hours earlier. I gazed at the African men and women and found that the information was not news to them. No eyes widened, no jaws tightened at the announcement. Our sister and her son have returned to Africa. We all know that she has worked very hard and that she feels herself an African. A mumble of agreement followed his statement. Our South African brother wages a fight for all of us. No day passes but that he is on the battlefield. No night comes without Vusumzi make at the gun, threatening the fortress of white oppression. Another rumble of accord lifted and floated in the room. Now I, the brother to all of you, have called for palaver. Neither of these young people have family in Egypt outside this small community. So I have asked you so that we can examine the points and weigh the matter. Panic was rising in my mind and paralyzing my legs. Joe said, I will ask this side of the room to argue for our sister, Maya, and this side of our brother, V.O.S. I shook myself away from the numbing shock and stood up. Excuse me, Joe, but I'm not on trial. I'm going home. Joe spoke to me over the undertone of disapproval. Sister, you are going to stay in Africa. You have a son and a name. If you can sit through this palaver, the outcome will be news. In Africa. You know, Maya, our people do not count on papers or magazines to tell us what we need to know. There are people here from Ghana, Mali, Guinea, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Liberia. Sister, try hard and sit down. Years before, I had understood that all I had to do, really had to do, was stay black and die. Nothing could be more interesting than the first or more permanent than the latter. In truly critical moments, I reminded myself of those discoveries. I walked back and sat down beside V.O.S., who had become a large black stranger. Joe Williamson placed a dining room chair in the middle of the half circle, talking all the while. The group from Maya, going right, will defend our brother. People left of V.U.S. will support our sister. And please remember, folks, we are the only family they have in this strange land. I looked to my right and my heart raced. My friends, Bandy, Kebi, Margaret Young, a Nigerian close friend, and Jara would be arguing for V.U.S. I turned and looked across to the other side and saw 3 infamous lechers, a few old indifferent men, and 3 women whom I didn't know well. My team looked hopeless. Joe took his seat and spoke to me. Sister, tell your complaint. Tell your side. Black Americans had no custom of publicly bearing the soul. In old-time churches, people used to rise and complain about the treatment they had received from fellow members, but those conferences had died out, leaving only the memory in ribald jokes. Mrs. Jackson stood up in church and reported, "Reverend brothers and sisters, I accuse Miss Taylor of going round town saying my husband has a wart on his private part." The congregation's ha-has sounded like drum rolls. Miss Taylor got up and said, "I have to speak to clarify what I said. Brothers and sisters, I did not say that Mr. Jackson had a wart on his private part. I never did, 'cause I never saw it. What I said, and this is all I said, was it felt like it was a wart. There was no precedent in my life for airing private affairs. I held myself still and erect. Joe repeated, "Sister, tell your part. Why do you find our brother impossible as a husband?" I looked at Joe, then at my dear friends lined up in V.U.S.'s defense. Banty, Kebi, and Margaret know all my complaints. I had cried in their arms and laid my head on their laps uncounted times. Now they sat with straight-up faces as if we were strangers. I turned to look at the company gathered in my behalf. Their faces were also cold, unsupportive, and strange. I was alone again, but then, since I was already black, all I had to do was die. I said, "The man stuffs his thing in any opening he finds. I am faithful, he is not." A few coughs fell from the mouths of my squad, and V.U.S.'s troop twitched and cleared their throats. I slaved my ass off. African women hardly ever use profanity in mixed company, but I wasn't strictly an African, and after all, they had gathered to hear me speak, and I was a black American. Mentioning slavery in present African company was a ploy. Their forefathers had been spared or had negotiated for the sale of my ancestors. I knew it, and they knew it. It gave me a little edge. I put money into the house. At 10 o'clock, I go alone to the broadcast building to narrate an essay, and I'm paid £1. V.U.S. spends money as if we are rich. He expects me to be faithful and steady, and he comes home smelling of cheap perfume and a whore's twat. They may not have heard the word before, but everyone knew what it meant. I reveled in the rustle of discomfort. They asked me, and I told them. Joe Williamson clapped his hands. "All right, Sister Maya has spoken. I call upon V.U.S.'s defense." In a snap, queries were directed at me. Have you kept yourself clean? Do you refuse your husband his marital rights? You are an American, after all. How well can you cook African food? Do you curse and act unbecoming? Do you try to dominate the man? Do you press him to have sex when he is tired? Do you obey him? Listen to him carefully? I answered every question with openness and sass. The sooner they rejected me, the sooner this odd ritual would be over. I would be free or get whatever was coming to me. When I finished responding, Joe turned to my squad. Their interrogation of V.U.S. was weak and without heart. Do you love her? Have you provided for her? Do you satisfy her? She had a child when she came to you. Have you tried to give her more children? Do you want her? V.U.S. answered honestly and quietly. There was a hiatus when he finished while Joe called for drinks for the crowd. We remained seated, holding fresh icy glasses. Joe began to prance in the clear plot of floor. Dainty, sure, and masculine. It seems to me, brothers and sisters, that Maya is in the right. Her objection is stronger than our brother's reply. I suggest that in this palaver our brother is the loser. He turned to Vuss's supporters. Do you agree? When the heads nodded for the first time that night, friendliness and smiles returned to the faces of my confidants. Joe went to stand in front of Vuz and arms reach away. Bro Vuz, it is decided that you are in the wrong and Sister Maya is in the right. Do you agree? Vuz lowered his large head in assent. Joe bowed, taking the agreement, and continued. You must provide drink for everyone who has met here tonight. You must bring a lamb or goat for us all to chop. A rampage of laughter followed the pronouncement, but was quelled with Joe's next words. And our sister has the right to leave you. Silence settled on the shoulders of the listeners, falling from the air like particled smog. Joe faced me. Sister, you have done well. You have sat through African palaver and you have won. Now you may leave. I was wrung dry by the ritual and only a little pleased by Joe's statement that now I had the right to leave. I never thought I needed anyone's approval but my own. Joe stepped up to me, close enough for me to see clearly the whites of his eyes. Now, sister, now that the triumph is in your hands, now that people from 6 countries agree that you can leave your husband and no guilt will fall on your head. Now in your position of strength, we throw ourselves on your mercy. The group responded with jubilant laughter. We ask you, from your righteous pinnacle, would you please give the man one more chance? I looked at Bandy, who instructed me with a nod. Kebby gave me a small smile. Margaret Young, my Nigerian friend, lifted her perfect eyebrows. I should say yes. I hadn't decided where to go. I had no date to leave, and if Joe was right, which I suspected, if I acted graciously, my name in Africa would be golden. Stay 6 months. Sister, give the man 6 months. I looked at Vuz. He was anxious. I knew immediately that his concern had less to do with me, and it had to do with his repute. He had never knowingly or wittingly mistreated me. I could stay with him 6 months. I said, I will stay. Chairs scraped the floor. Vuz took me in his arms and whispered, You are a generous woman. My wife. Joe Williamson shouted, This time we party. We wait for the fatted calf, but now we drink and celebrate the reunion of our brother and sister. We toast Mother Africa, who needs all her children. Chapter 19. Guy graduated from high school and then took a knapsack and joined Egyptian friends for a trek in the Sahara. My friendship with Kebby and Bandy became stronger. More women were hired in my office, and some found my presence incongruous and unacceptable. I spoke halting Arabic, smoked cigarettes openly, was not a Muslim, and was an American on top of that. On the day when President Kennedy and Khrushchev had their confrontation over the independence of Cuba, in the hours when the next world war hung like an unpaid debt over our heads, no one spoke to me. The male employees ignored me. As if by a time warp, we were all returned to my first day at the Arab Observer. The women were openly hostile. Papers which they needed to bring to my desk were handed over by the coffee server or the copy boy. Actions by people thousands of miles away, men who didn't know I was alive and whose sympathy I would never expect, influenced my peace and rendered me odious. Kennedy was an American, and so was I. I didn't have the language to explain that being a black American was qualitatively different from being an American. I worried like everyone else, but made myself scarce in the fifths. Vuz was trying, and so was I, but neither of us was able to infuse vitality into our wilting marriage. He steadily gained weight as I became thinner. Indifference became the mattress we lay on, so our sexual sharings disintegrated into unsatisfying periods of hasty and uncomfortable rubbings. I had promised to stay for 6 months, and we both felt the time was dragging. Banty and Kebby found excuses to send their drivers to my house bearing food and crates of liquor. Accompanying notes stated that they had overordered or simply had no more storage room. I became more dependent on our friendship. I spent nearly every evening in the company of one or the other or both of the sisterly women. When we talked, they told amusing tales of home, of their families, of the husbands they loved, of the children, of a merciful God, and sometimes of their private fantasies. V.U.S. was never mentioned. After 5 months, I began to think about my future and Guy's placement in an African school. Ghana's university was known to be the best institution of higher learning on the continent. I thought I'd be very lucky to enroll him there. I had no contacts in Ghana, but I did have Joe Williamson as a brother. I went to him. "Joe, I'm leaving." He showed no surprise. "I want to go to West Africa. I want to place Guy in the University of Ghana, and I need a job." He nodded. "And I need your help." He nodded again and said he had been expecting my decision and had prepared for it. There was an offer of a job from the Liberian Department of Information based on a white paper on Liberia which I had written for the United Arab Republic. He got up from his desk and hugged me. "Sister, you will be an asset to Liberia." V.U.S. accepted my departure with undisguised relief. We had worn our marriage threadbare, and it was time to discard it. He would get tickets on United Arab Airlines. He had friends in Ghana we could stay with for a few days. If I got into trouble, I could always count on him. I could have any of the furniture, which was now paid for, sent on to Liberia. I thanked him for the plane arrangements and refused the furniture. I knew that other women would be in the house before the sheets lost my body's heat. He grinned and hugged me. I had taken Guy into my confidence as far as was possible with a proud, distant 17-year-old boy. He knew that for the past year I had been unhappy. After the palaver, I had told him we would remain in Cairo for at least 6 more months, and he would have time to finish school. He wanted to have a party. All his friends would come. Would V.U.S. and I leave him the house for a few hours? Would Omenadia cook chicken and lamb and rice her special way? Maybe he could borrow records from the Williamsons, and wouldn't it be all right if he served a little beer? His sudden jollity made me perceive how much he had been affected by our pleasureless home. I realized that it had been a long time since I had seen that wide, innocent smile or his fine dark eyes shine. Bandy and Joe gave us a farewell party. Kebi and Jara prepared an authentic Ethiopian dinner for a merry crowd. David Du Bois took us all out to an opulent restaurant near the pyramids. I had a goodbye lunch with Hanifa Fathi and her friends, and the day finally arrived to leave Cairo. Guy held my hand on the plane. He leaned near and whispered, "It'll be okay, Mom. Don't cry. I love you, Mom. Lots of people love you." I made no attempt to explain that I was not crying because of a lack of love, or certainly not the loss of V.U.S.'s affection. I was mourning all my ancestors. I had never felt that Egypt was really Africa, but now that our route had taken us across the Sahara, I could look down from my window seat and see trees and bushes, rivers, and dense forest. It all began here. The jumble of poverty-stricken children sleeping in rat-infested tenements or abandoned cars. The terrifying moan of my grandmother. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more." The drug days and alcoholic nights of men for whom hope had not been born. The loneliness of women who would never know appreciation or a mite's share of honor. Here, there, along the banks of that river, someone was taken, tied with ropes, shackled with chains, forced to march for weeks carrying the double burden of neck irons and abysmal fear. In that large clump of trees, looking like wood moss from the plain's great height, boys and girls had been hunted like beasts, caught and tethered together. Sacrificial lambs on the altar of greed. America's period of orgiastic lynchings had begun on yonder broad savannah. Every ill I knew at home, each hateful look on a white face, each odious rejection based on skin color, the mockery, the disenfranchisement, the lamentations and loud wailing for a lost world, irreclaimable security, all that long, onerous journey to misery, which had not ended yet, had begun just below our plane. I wept. Guy rose from time to bring fresh Kleenex, and I didn't dare speak to him of my thoughts. I would not make a sound. If I opened my mouth, I might not be able to close it again. Screams would pierce the air, and I would race the aisles like a mad thing. I cramped my lips together until the seam between them meshed, and allowed, as my only expression, the warm tears gliding like honey down my face. The airport at Accra sounded like an adult playground and looked like a festival. Single travelers wearing Western suits or dresses, which would be deemed fashionable in New York, were surrounded by hordes of well-wishers, swathed in oral prints or the rich plaid silk of kente cloth. Languages turned the air into clouds of lusty sound. The sight of so many black people stirred my deepest emotions. I had been away from the colors too long. Guy and I grinned at each other and turned to see a sight which wiped our faces clean. 3 black men walked past us wearing airline uniforms, visor caps, white pants, and jackets whose shoulders bristled with epaulettes. Black pilots? Black captains? It was 1962. In our country, the cradle of democracy, whose anthem boasted, "The land of the free, the home of the brave." The only black men in our airports fueled planes, clean cabins, loaded food, or were skycaps, racing the pavement for tips. Guy nudged me, and I turned to see another group of African officers walking unconcerned toward the gate which opened out on the tarmac. Ghana was the place for my son to go to college. My Toby, the southern black word for a lucky talisman, had hunched me right. Guy would be able to weigh his intelligence and test his skills without being influenced by racial discrimination. We passed through customs, delighted to have our bags examined by black people. Our taxi driver was black. The dark night seemed friendly to me, and when the cab's lights illuminated a pedestrian, I saw a black face. By the time we reached the address Vuz had given me, a knot in my stomach, which had bunched all my remembered life, had unfurled. I realized I hadn't seen a white face for over an hour. The feeling was light and extremely strange. We stopped in front of a rambling white bungalow, which looked eerily fluorescent in the black night. A short, reserved man answered Guy's knock. He welcomed us in and told us that he was Walter Inthia, and after embracing us both, showed us to rooms in the rear of the house. I joined him quickly in the living room to assure him that we didn't plan to stay long. I needed no more than a week to get my son's schooling arranged and get him a place to stay on campus, and I had to hurry on to Liberia, where I had a job waiting in the Department of Information. Walter said Bro Vuz was the pride of the PAC and that my reputation had preceded me. We could stay as long as necessary. He was an economist working for the Ghanaian government, was divorced, and lived alone. He didn't entertain much, but he had asked a few South Africans and Black Americans resident in Ghana to come that evening to greet us.
From the people who brought you Betty White off their rockers comes a brand new prank show starring America's favorite poet. It's Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Laughs.
Hello, child. I am the rock. I am the river. I am the one who put a pie under the butt of Morgan Freeman.
Whoa! Watch as Maya Angelou pranks her esteemed colleagues. Look out!
It appears I've sat in a pie.
I suppose you have.
But I feel no shame sitting in that pastry. Just human nature, I suppose. It has been an honor.
Watch what I do to my dear friend, Dr. Cornel West.
What has happened here?
I did it. I removed the bottom of your bag.
Sister Maya, was this an act of malice?
No, Brother West. It was an act of whimsy.
Well, then I accept.
Oh, man! And the pranks keep rolling!
Wowzer! The sands of time are like rain on a tin roof. Never stopping, never ceasing. Now, watch me punk Stephen King.
What?
Your Your car has been towed. I should know. I am a policewoman.
Maya Angelou?
Yes, it's me, Maya Angelou. This is a prank.
It's an honor.
For me as well.
So honored. So tune into I Know Why the Caged Bird Laughs.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Franzen. I'd like to order 50 pizzas. It's for a prank.
She's Angelou.
Angelou. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. One and done. We're in chapter 19. We'll pick up in the midpoint, finish that up, and then finish the entire book on the second installment, which is to come. The number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564-943 #. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. We're picking up when we resume the paragraph. The visitors came together. There was a tall, thin Yoruba man and his Canadian wife. That's what we'll pick up at for the next segment. Number again, 605-313-5164. Decode 564-943 #. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Final thoughts on the text. I asked last week, particularly for black female listeners, because I said the assumption is that black males, of course, are illiterate and dropouts. So, of course, we have not read this book or even heard of it. I know that was the case for myself. Black females, had you heard of this book? Read this book? Like, is this one that they include if you go into like feminist studies? Would you read this book? Did you have this book on the bookshelf growing up? Like, even if you didn't read it, is this one that's been on the shelf, that sort of thing? Because I'd never even heard of this book before. Like, if somebody had asked me, like, what's one of Dr. Angelou's autobiographies other than I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings? Give me one title, Gus T. I would have needed quite a bit of, and I mean, I would have never guessed Heart of a Woman? Like, what? What? Anyway, we will have read the whole book. Give us about an hour. Quickly, so we got in Saturday Night Live. I told you they got a bunch of times where they mocked, in my opinion, Saturday Night Live mocked Maya Angelou. We're hearing this. They're doing the current 50 years of celebrating all of the many, many, many decades of racism from SNL. This would be a big one. So this is, to my knowledge, maybe the only skit that I've seen thus far where they mock Maya Angelou and have her portrayed by someone other than a black male. This time they get Maya Rudolph to portray Dr. Angelou. Maya Rudolph, interestingly, the actress, she has one white parent, one non-white parent, black father. Oh, actually, she has a white parent. Her mother is Minnie Riperton, the singer. So she is pale enough. She's paler than President Obama, that at times she portrays white people as an actress, and at times she portrays non-white. They even said the ambiguous, sometimes she'll take on Latina characters, whatever that means. Anyway, but they get her to play Dr. Angelou. Obviously, Maya Rudolph, because she has one white parent, is substantially more pale than Dr. Angelou. In fact, Maya Rudolph looks closer to Guy Johnson's complexion because they both have one white parent, one non-white parent. Anyway, in that segment, the Saturday Night Live segment, you heard that they have Dr. Angelou playing pranks on Morgan Freeman, privileged black male, Dr. Cornel West, privileged black male, getting them sitting in a pie and all this old nonsense. And she continued. Then they call her Angelou at the end total, like I said, just mocking black people. I'd have to go and even see who are the actors who are portraying Morgan Freeman and, you know, all these people. Anyway, there's so many Saturday Night Live segments where they mock Maya Angelou, we can't even include them all. I told you, I think I forgot one week and played two, so we have to catch up. More SNL to come. Now, one thing that I will say, because today, and then given what we heard in the audio too, I heard Neely Fuller Jr. old audio, when I say old, like 20 years ago, way old. And he said one of the most disgusting, he didn't even use his normal adjectives like pitiful or primitive or stupid. One of the most disgusting things that you could possibly see is a large group of black people celebrating black people and black culture and woo, our ancestors and kings and queens. I don't know how anyone could look at that and think anything other than, oh my God, that is disgusting. We're here on the plantation and what? Oh God. And he went right into what is black culture? Stay black and die. No, that's not what he said. That's not what he said. He said black culture, turn and run. And every page of this book, pretty much, I would say that is the confirmation. But it was so wild to hear Fuller go from that to then start this book and Guy Johnson's Kings and Queens, and they go to Africa and all that, like, ooh-wee. Woo. Even I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. It's on every page. It's on every page. Woo. That is one thing. What did you learn? What's one thing that I learned from this here book? Oh my God. This right here is why black culture should be put in the trash. Maybe black culture from all over the world, because you got a teaspoon of black culture beyond the U.S. Put it in the trash. All of it. All of it. If that means the hip hop got to go too. Deuces, K. Dot, that's Kendrick Lamar for the slow. Deuces, Biggie Smalls, Dougie Fresh, Black Rob, we done lost it all. Gotta lose it all. It is a bunch of garbage. Jesus Christ. Anywho, let's see. We'll get to the folks that, but that was I would have had a totally different experience, I suspect, if I had not heard that from Mr. Fuller literally like seconds, because I didn't hear the same Fuller audio to start the program that you all did. If I had not heard that before we got started, and then he went right to the king, whew, man, I'm gonna get me some stuff tonight. That there, Negro culture. 2025, really this book, 1960, 2025, take your pick. It is about the same. That is Negro culture. Let us see. We will do one phone and then one email. Do not wait till the last moment if you have commentary, since we are wrapping it all up this here week. Octavius in New York, commentary to share. Proceed.
Greetings, Gus, callers and listeners. Really interesting, that scene. I just visualizing her actually walking into that room and almost being like a jury and a trial, so to speak, for their relationship. And I don't know, I just couldn't even imagine that. But in some aspects, I actually think that in some cases that may be something toxic. I can understand how people could see it as something toxic, but I could also understand how people could see it as something supportive, because after all, they don't have that much of a vested interest in their relationship financially. So they're strictly being there because they actually either want to see it succeed or want to see the betterment for both of them to move on. So, yeah, I thought that scene was kind of intense. It kind of caught me out of nowhere, and I couldn't imagine being in any position like that. But really, really well done, well written out. And then on page 318, when she was crying, it was a line she had in there, and, you know, obviously crying about the ancestors, but the part where she says, the drug day, sorry, pardon, I'll rewind a little bit. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. The drug days of alcoholic nights of men for whom hope had not been born. The loneliness of women who would never know appreciation or might's share of honor. This is some good writing, and I'm glad she threw in the drinking part, which I think is what still happens till this day. Many of us just steep into a bottle, and the bottle gets bigger, and we get smaller. The next page, 319, I really appreciated this metaphor. It was, I cramped my lips together until the seam between them meshed, and allowed as my only expression the warm tears gliding like honey down my face. Really, really good writing there. I really appreciated that part as well. And the other thing that I really thought about was just as a parent, I get the sense that to me, throughout this book, I appreciate the fact that as a parent, she's shown how much as she's matured, because she's thinking about going and taking her son to this school, which is probably one of the best schools in Africa, and at the same time, with thought, because this is something that if any parent that is counter-racist is thinking, raising your child in an environment where their intellect will not be stumped by racism. And that hit heavy for me, because I couldn't do that for my son. You know, neither one of them, unfortunately. But to hear that and understand that, like, that's one of her primary goals. As a parent, you could only tip your hat and give so much respect for that. I really appreciated that line. That is something that I think probably gets overlooked and is not really talked about enough sometimes. But those are my observations for that passage right there. Thank you.
Much obliged, Octavius in New York. Some of the books set right there in the good old NY. Let's see. *61 for other folks. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. I thought in the singing section she was referring to black people in the U.S. So that's from last week when we were talking about she was sitting, I think it was with David. They were sitting with a group of black people in Egypt, presumably black people, dark black people. And she said that they would just start talking amongst, because David is a black dude from the States, and they would just start talking, and sometimes they would sing old slave spirituals, and the other Africans would listen at first, and these are genuine slave songs from the last group of enslaved people on earth, large group of enslaved black people on earth. That was the portion all she was talking about. He continues, thanks, Gus, for your comments regarding Brazil and slave history. That's when I pointed out that she said from the last large group of people to be enslaved, and I said that is not factually true. Slavery lasted in Brazil, I believe, until 1888, decades after Civil War ended. So glad I read this book. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings a long time ago, and other than that, I had no familiarity with any of her written work. I did, but only her poetry, which is disgraceful. Like, you don't know about, she went to go march and protest about Lumumba and all that? Come on. She was so much more than an actress in supporting roles and a poet laureate. She had an amazing life, for sure. Chapter 18, 256, I told Vuz about the Women's Party and Medina. News spread in the African diplomatic corps that Medina was a slut, a hussy, a whore, a home-breaking harlot. Name calling. Sure enough, name calling. What about the men who accepted her advances? Yep, they probably got names for them too, but sure enough, it takes two to tango. No name calling either way, though. Maybe that's another, got these old patriarchal, sexist black dudes, see? 2. Vuz. Oh, God. I am a man. An African man. Whatever that means. It is interesting how often this phrase is used. And in a book, what is this book called again? The Heart of a Woman. Every page, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a man, okay. And even when I heard that Saturday Night Live skit at the end of it, when they said Angelou, I said that's all white people could think. And that's what Fuller said. That is all white people could think. Looking at us, kente cloth, African garb, kings and queens. These are the biggest bunches of loons and fools in the world. That's all they could think. And that's how they treat us and regard us. I am a man, but that has been stunning for me, that every page, every dude almost, it doesn't matter if her son or guy, Vooz wasn't even born in the States. He one of them old tethers, isn't that what they say? And he said, I'm a man, an African man, but I'm a man. I'm a woman. Pitiful. Let's see. Among the people I knew, my family, friends, promiscuity was the ultimate blow in a marriage. It struck down the pillars of trust which held the relationship aloft. It was also physically dangerous. Venereal diseases could easily be the result of indiscreet momentary gratification. What about pregnancy? If you play around with sex, the joke is on the offspring. Amen. Incidentally, that did strike me to be a bit of hypocrisy. Like, did this whole tacky thing with Vooz start when she was with the bail bondsman? And I thought they were like engaged in all this. And she was just like, I'm feeling this black fella now. We're going to have to wrap this up. I'm like, what? Right on. That is logical, but Number 4. United States white men with the implements of slavery and racial oppression had taken from black men their names, languages, power, wives, daughters, innate sense of self-values, their confidence. Because they had been unable, however, to kill the sexuality, white men began to envy it, extol it, adore, and fear it. A number of black men found that they had one thing left which was beyond the reach of their enemy's grasp. How would that be when they lynch and take black people's testicles and put them in a jar? I thought that was what strange fruit. Billie Holiday told us that at the beginning of the book. Some, contradictions here and there, but whatever. Enemy's grasp, allegedly, commenced to identify themselves as sexual masters, possessors of the big dicks, the artful penises, and insatiable lust. White men greedily and enviously agreed. VGQ. I'm not sure I agree with this. I'm not even sure it's logical, but whatever. With this passage, it neglects the documented history of white men engaged in homoerotic torture, rape, and domination of black males, which continues today. I said for Black History Month, they should get the plunger out, Justin Volk, because he paraded it around the station like he won the Super Bowl championship. He ran around, woo, you see what I did to him? Oh, they should just put the plunger down. Maybe Carl Walker, she can make an exhibit of that with the plunger. San Francisco, black females, Carl Walker. Well, she's Stockton, but same thing. And Dr. Angelou. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this. See the Cows Book Club selection, The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption and Homoeroticism in U.S. Slave Culture. Indeed. 5. The heavy door on the Liberian residency was opened by a servant. I, the brother to all of you, have called for palaver. I suggested in this palaver, our brother is the loser. I will stay. I knew immediately that this concern had less to do with me than it had to do with his repute. Palaver is defined as an improvised conference between two groups. I suspect Vooz orchestrated this. His loss was predetermined. I think Miss Angelou implies that it is to some degree. All of this is so bizarre. I guess when Octavius was saying, he was kind of surprised, what is going on here? What have I walked in? What is going? Man, when you don't ask enough questions. So if this thing, hopefully not, but if this thing does fall apart, what happens? Like, oh, we go to the Palaver. What is that all about? and so if this had fallen apart in New York, like say when they got evicted, say that had been the coup de grace, so would we have had to get a bunch of black people in New York? We would have had to go and get like Buddy and the Killings to come and do the Palaver in New York? I don't know, man. I don't know, man. All that would have to be discussed way in advance. And then because even a whole lot of white marriages don't last, that would have to be talked about too. Like whatever happens, infidelity, we just get tired of each other, you know, you eat too many Cheetos, whatever. This is what to do. We've already discussed all of that, if we're supposed to go to divorce court or the Palaver or whatever. That way it's no surprise about all that, but it should not be no, what? Who? Where? What? Oh, look. Come on. Not, and again, all of this started with, she was with the other fella, the bail bondsman, Thomas. She was going to marry him. And then it was, this dashing black fella from the continent. Ooh, that's how all this started. No questions at all. Just foolish. I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. That's black culture. Let's see. 6. Joe Williamson shouted, this time we party. We wait for the fated calf, but now we drink, and I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. The reunion of our brother and sister. We toast Mother Africa, whatever that means. Seems a little inappropriate to have a celebration in this instance. Is a party method. That's all we do. That I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. That's what we do. It diminishes it. Maybe I'm being a little too critical. No, black brother, not at all, because they were drinking all throughout. Let me get you some scotch, sister. Let me get you a drink. Didn't even say, okay, Vooz, you lost. You got to get us all a shot of liquor, expensive liquor. What, tequila? Patron. More expensive. Well, EV, VSOP. We want something really pricey. Get like, what? Why is... But I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. That's black culture. Negro History Month. That's us. 3 and sometimes, literally, Negro History Month will be sponsored by St. Ides, Cognac. I told you, we were at the White Privilege Conference in Wisconsin 2010. Every other time Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., cowbell, went up on the stage, get the Yak Club tonight, the Yak Club, the Yak Club. That's for cognac, like Jim Jones. That's black culture. And we're at the white privilege. I kept saying that the whole time. That's 15 years ago. I kept saying that the whole time. We're supposed to be talking about racism. Like, I'm not trying to be going and taking a sip. You got race soldiers around, Tim Wise and all these folks. Like, come on. We're at a divorce proceeding. Dissolution of a marriage. Why is that? Where's the good scotch at? Let's have a sip. And it's been the same thing. Let's sit down and talk about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference news and fundraising. Let's have a drink. Let's go to the bar, in fact, to talk about what Dr. King said. Even my brother, Guy, he said, you think we can have a sip? Just a sip. Just a sip. What is I'm gonna get me some stuff to, because that's been on display more so than stay black and die, because that might even be all you got to do in staying black. Get you some stuff tonight and you staying black. Let's see. 19. I made no attempt to explain that I was not crying because of a lack of love, that word again, of certainty, not the loss of Vooz's affection. I was mourning on my ancestors. This ancestor explanation seems like a rationalization of her feelings of loss. I have to think about that. 2. Sacrificial lambs on the altar of greed. America's period of orgiastic lynchings had begun on yonder broad savannah. Every ill I knew at home, each hateful look on a white face, each odious rejection based on skin color, the mockery, the disenfranchisement. I wept. If I opened my mouth, I might not be able to close it again. Did this episode have more to do with feelings of failure of her marriage, failings as a parent, her chaotic and nomadic life, never seeming to achieve stability? I am not so sure. Also, a very good point, I think, for most people A marriage breaking up would be pretty traumatic. Eviction, that would be pretty traumatic. On the other side of the continent, that would be stressful. Regardless, she certainly has expressed her own concerns about her parenting or lack thereof throughout the text. So valid, and I think a lot of people, even if these things were going well, where they weren't having evictions and divorces, a lot of people would still have concerns about these areas. Is my child doing okay? Am I doing okay with my parenting? And blah, blah, blah. It's stressful being on another continent and all that, and these things are not going well for her. 3. Ghana was the place for my son to go to college. My Toby, the southern black word for a lucky talisman, had hunched me right. God would be able to weigh his intelligence and test his skills without being influenced by racial discrimination. Toby sounds a little like magical thinking or superstitions as opposed to logic. Depends on what you mean by racial discrimination. I was thinking the same thing. Like, I have no idea where you would go in the universe, because they got Elon Musk and they can get you up on the space station or what have you. So I have no idea where you would be able to go to school in the known universe, and it would be no influence of racism, white supremacy. She said racial discrimination, but I have no idea. In the first place that I would not think of on that list, any place on the continent of Africa, and you could take that from Cairo to Madagascar, no place, top to bottom, would I think, oh yes, here, that will be the spot that it, like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like, come on. Like, come on. Now we can look at the rest of the planet, which also, that would not make sense. But I mean, really? The continent? Really? Yeah. VGQ. 4. Kwame Nkrumah was the African hero. He had wedded Marxism to the innate African socialism. What? And that would be a double whammy for... Now, what does all of that mean? Marxism, African, socialism. Give me, matter, triple whammy. I don't know what none of those means. And I suspect 99% of the people who use these terms do not either. I might even add including the author on this one. And no, wait a minute. Can I get one for Dr. Welsing? Can I get one for Dr. Well, what did she say? She said, prior to me attempting to be a counter-racist, I was a Marxist, Leninist, and her brilliant, she said, I think it was her grandparents said, Lord Jesus, the more education they get, the dumber they get. Facts. Still in 2025. Oh, wait a minute. I should have just kept reading the commentary. Let's see. He had wedded Marxism to innate African socialism and was loved by black people all over the world as he was hated and feared by whites in power. That word love pops up in... Anyway, our reader writes in, I remember Dr. Welsing talking about the time she came back from college and started talking about Marxism, Marxist-Leninist, to her family and was ridiculed by them. Show enough, echo. 5, Richard got drunk at the picnic, so Guy was driving. Richard, stop there. Didn't get that far, but we will shortly because we are going to wrap this all up today. The email untiljustice@gmail.com, the number 605-313-5164, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Okie dokie. Going back to the beginning of chapter 18, I'll get to some of my notes. Keep an eye out. Folks have thoughts. Let's see. She says, so the marriage is pretty much over. Attempted union. She said, we returned to the sequence of our lives. Work occupied our days, and parsimonious lovemaking ended some stolid nights. Parsimonious said, ooh, what does that mean? Unwilling to spend money or use resources. Stingy or frugal. So they were having stingy lovemaking. And then when I first pulled this up, parsimonious, my dictionary popped up on thesaurus instead of the dictionary for synonyms. Niggardly is one of the first synonyms alternative terms for parsimonious. Miserly is the first alternative, and then number 2, niggardly. Let's see. So they do the name calling of Medina. She's a slut, blah, blah, blah. She said, so when they're having this discussion, she enthused about, I'm a man, an African man, and I got my sexual needs as a manly African man, and it's not the same for you. But again, we do have, there you go, sexism popped up in the book. We talked about that last time. I know in Andrée Blouin's book, like, dang, where's the sexism at? And we get some here. 2 rounds of it, because they were name calling Medina as well. And so she says, I wasn't sure what God would do if someone messed with his only son, nor how I would fare when I dropped the obescent attitude of an accepting wife and allowed my black American femaleness to emerge. What does that mean? Black American femaleness? I just don't know what that means. I would need somebody to break that down. And so when Mr. Bernstein, back when they were doing the Blacks a Clown show, when he didn't want to pay you and he didn't want to pay Max Roach for your musical talent, did you show him your black American femaleness? They would have to break it down for me. Like, what is that, and when does that get put to use? It can't just be to get at other black people. Like, is this black, what is this? Again, make sure I get it right. Black American femaleness. Is this going to be used against race soldiers when they come up to do us no good? Is that when she went to the savages with the pistol? Now, is that black American femaleness? Just asking. Let's see. She said, when we were at last in the apartment, I checked Guy's room and found him asleep. That part of my life was comfortably accounted for. It seems like so many times. I don't know if that was Octavius last week, but the caller had said, I feel kind of sad for Guy. And I was like, why? He said he's just kind of left. Like, she leaves him just gallivanting. Sometimes she goes to the other side of the continent and is doing this and doing that. Like, man, it just, it seems kind of sad. And then he's got a white parent who's gone. Like, it just seems kind of sad. I said, oh, okay, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but here we go again. He's just left, hopefully. Now, he is considerably older at this time, but he's been getting left alone or left with somebody else frequently and throughout the duration of his childhood, it seems. So, let's see. We already talked about that. I'm a man. Not enough questions asked. This whole exchange about all of this, not enough questions asked. And again, as Fuller talked about frequently, these, arrangements, they are not supposed to work in a system of white supremacy racism. That's why he said you lower your expectations, you do the best you can, and you try to ask lots of questions up front so you can minimize these types of surprises. Do you sleep around? All of that. So your African manliness, that means you got to have sexual activity with 8, 12, 15 females. All of those questions are asked in advance. That way you don't get surprised. And what address am I going to when I fly across the world? Oh, okay, get that too. More questions asked. Let's see. She says some of the other women with knives and guns, boiling water, poison, and the divorce courts proved that they did not agree with the common attitude that males can just go out and have sexual intercourse to their freedom. What is up with this poisoning again? Like, didn't she talk about killing them before and swang? Why is that up again in the book? Now, is that the black American femaleness? I didn't hear nothing about poisoning Mr. Bernstein when he wouldn't pay you. I didn't hear nothing about poisoning these folks who evicted you and your child and threw you out on the street. I didn't hear nothing about poisoning the teachers who were practicing racism against the guy. How is it all of this and it's just a black person is going to be poisoned because of their bedroom activities. And they didn't rape you. Man, let's see. We do a job on each other. We will swango you up. Let's see. They get to the divorce. There's so much drinking there. It's hard to take any of this serious. Like, it's just drinking, which has been the whole book. I'm going to get me some. I guess it would have been odd if they had non-alcoholic beverages, because that popped up that one time last week. And I said, oh, wow, isn't that stunning? And even then, Assalamu alaikum. She said it was because we have in the Muslim company, so we can't put the chitlins out and can't do no malt liquor tonight. We have to be all virgin pina coladas. We'll all be teetotalers. Amen. Mashallah. We should maybe all be Muslim if that's going to get us to put the liquor down for a little while. Be dry February. Save our brain computer. But they got all this liquor and they come to whatever decision that may have been premeditated, whatever. None of this made me feel real sparkling about, African culture, so-called, or none of that. Although the one part that I did change up the highlight. Now, I mentioned last week when she said they were singing these tacky songs that were supposed to be the last slave songs from a large group of people enslaved on the planet. And I said that she was talking exclusively about black people born in the U.S. Man, I had to do my watermelon jig, black male privilege shuffle, when she comes around this week and says, I slave my ass off. African women hardly ever use profanity in mixed company, but I wasn't strictly an African, and after all they had gathered to hear me speaking, I was a black American. Mentioning slavery in present African company was a ploy. Their forefathers had been spared, or had negotiated the sale of my ancestors. I knew it and they knew it. It gave me a little edge. That right there, bang, now we get the clarification from the author. Absolutely. I was not saying all of the dark people on the planet are in this slave thing together. No. These niggers over here, tethers, on the continent, y'all sold us. So no, we're not in this. We, black people in the U.S., we are the descendants of slavery. We are the ones that claim this title, see? Now, when I read that, I said, okay, that confirms what I thought last week. And I said, this is so tacky. And it even reminded me with even more importance, all of this is based on a lie. Not all of it, but at least you got flawed logic and inaccuracies all through there. Like, if this is something I really care about black people, Jesus Christ, man, you went out there and did all that tearing up for Patrice Lumumba. That's not slavery. They chopped the population in half by 10 million dark people that look like you, and chopping off hands killed Patrice Lumumba, got his teeth in a jar. That's not slavery. Man, forget that. They got black people right now in the mines over there so we can get an Apple computer. That's not slavery. Okay, forget all that. Fine, no problem. Black people in the continent, forget. And even y'all sold us. So is that true everywhere you go? Like if you go to South Africa, that is a legit argument that you can say, yes, you all, the black people here in this part of Africa, y'all sold us. Is that true? If you move and go to Madagascar, I said them earlier. So if we go to Madagascar, y'all sold my cousins. Is that true? Bump all that. Fine. We blame all of the black people on the continent. Y'all not with us. You sort of okay. Black people in Brazil, it's more of them than it is here. If you really, I love me some black people and all that, there's no way you can be in the Western Hemisphere and be talking about racism and have no include or totally exclude Brazil. Especially if you're going to include slavery in this somehow. Like, whoa, most of those people, when she gets all waxing poetically about the lynching starting over yonder, most of those stolen folks did not end up in the U.S. Most of them ended in places like Brazil, South America, Caribbean, the American slave coast. Ned and Constance Sublett, they were guests on the program the day after the Super Bowl, February 2016. Peyton Manning celebrating, go Broncos. they were on the program, they talked about this explicitly. And a part of that, all that rape that they had here, that's how they grew their internal population, especially later on. They didn't do all that theft of niggers. We just do a lot of raping. Thomas Jefferson. But Brazil and all of them, oh yeah, that's where most of the stolen niggers from the continent, that's where they went. That should be included if we're going to seriously talk about white supremacy racism, which is slavery to this day. February 13, 2025, slavery all around the world. But that is so tacky just to get on some, oh, y'all are not like, be like Kendrick Lamar. Y'all not like us. Get over, y'all not like us. Yeah. And you participated in selling us in this too. Yeah. We got a little bit up on y'all. Like, what? What? That is so tacky and lame, and that is the way race soldiers want us to think about this problem, to find little, what did I say, parsimonious, niggardly ways of being going to be in conflict with other non-white people. And like I said, a lot of times you have real spurious logic, if not flagrant errors, and how you have constructed all of this. Replace white supremacy with justice. Stop being in conflict with other non-white people. Anywho, let's see. And they get more drinks. And drinks. Like, I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. Let's see. When she talks about being at the Arab Observer, and after Khrushchev and Kennedy, which is a big part of soundtrack to coup d'etat, them having their skirmish over Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that, and the females at the Arab Observer newspaper were hostile to her because you're an American, you're with Kennedy and all of them. What skin complexion are these people like? Are these dark people at the Arab Observer? Are these people that could be classified as white? What do they look? Are they same thing I said with guy? Are they guys' complexion? Because if these are individuals who could be classified as white and they're hostile to you, like, oh, I could understand. Maybe you didn't pass the brown paper bag test over there. I don't know. I would need more information about it. But I certainly, regardless, I certainly think that could be a factor. Skin bleaching is a big thing all over the world. $billion business to this day. Let's see. In Banty and Cabby found excuses to send their drivers to my house bearing food and crates of liquor. Again, all this drinking, even if we know she might be sad down, which is the worst, if she might be depressed or lonely, let's not fill the house up with crates of liquor then. Like, Jesus, let's find a way to get her out of the house. Get some water and some exercise and all the rest of it. Don't stay in and drink away your troubles. We do all that to get our diabetes and gain a whole lot of weight. And then guy, once they get away and she thinks his spirits have elevated and he's doing a little bit better to not be around all this chaos and tension of a dissolving marriage, hey, let's have a jamboree. Wouldn't it be all right if we served a little beer? That's what's been modeled for the entire book, his entire life. I'm going to get me some stuff tonight. You have a little bit of stuff. A little bit. Brain computer is still developing till about 25. Liquor, reefer, tackle football are all on the list of things to avoid until your brain computer is totally developed. Let's see. Authentic Ethiopian dinner. Woo! I am foolish about some Ethiopian food. Oh, we have so much. So many Ethiopian restaurants here in Seattle. I'd had Ethiopian food before I got here, but oh man. And they have like lots of veggie offerings. I normally get a big veggie combo so you can try lots of different things, but oh my goodness. Foolish for some Ethiopian food. Like, oh, you have no idea. Let's see. And even that, when, like I said, when she got into all that about the orgiastic lynchings that began abroad, well, those lynchings that began abroad, most of it did not come to so-called America. That term again, most of it went to the Caribbean and South America, if you care anything at all about the stolen black people and all of that, since this is the last group of black people to be enslaved, which is not even true for the U.S., but, whatever. When she got, oh my goodness, when she said 3 black men walked past us wearing airline uniforms, visored caps, white pants, jackets whose shoulders bristled with epaulettes, black pilots, black captains, diversity, equity, and inclusion hires. Again, you get these old unqualified niggers, and that's exactly why we had that plane go down at Reagan National Airport. And where was President Trump when you need him? We just want qualified pilots. He just said that. Who gets on a plane and even thinks like that? Oh my gosh, I hope we got a black pilot. Ooh, did you see we got a black pilot? You just want to get there safely. He just said that days ago, and I said the same thing she did then. Like, I would lose my mind if I went to get on a plane and the pilot was black. Like, oh my God, whoa, they don't even have black pilots here. And that's still true, 2025. They don't even have black male pilots here. Like, what? They don't have black female pilots either, but what? What? Where did you, look at Leroy. What? I wouldn't even be thinking Leroy going to clash the languages. Where did you come from? What is going on? Leroy is flying the plane. My God. And it'd be the same for Lakeisha, but what? Whew. And then I might have, oh yeah, this might be old diversity, inclusion, equity. I hope we get there. So let me buckle up. I can't believe it. Let's see. And she said not being she said, I realized I hadn't seen a white face for over an hour. The feeling was light and extremely strange. Now, I have traveled a little bit at this point. I've not been to the continent, but I can say there are parts of the U.S. where you could go and not see a white face for a long period of time. Now, I don't know if this is still the case now because I haven't lived there in some time, so things may have changed. But I know for sure in Atlanta, especially the further south you go from like 5 Points downtown, oh man, yes, you could easily structure not an hour. You could structure things so you might not see a white person for the entire day. Now, like I said, things may have changed, although I would be startled if things in that region have changed that much, but things may have changed. Racial dislocation, as we heard, white people can make you move, but I know there are for sure places, other places, not just, that part of Atlanta as it used to be, where you could definitely go more than an hour. Like I said, you could organize it whole day and not see a white face easily. And you could go out. You wouldn't have to hide in the house. You could go out, go to the bank, go shop, all kinds of things. You would not see one white person. That does not mean you are away from racism, white supremacy. Probably just means you're going to be called even more names and you won't be able to drink the water safely. Let's see. We drank and brought gin. It's not there as we get to more partying, but woo! If anybody knows, got any greater insight on all you have to do is stay black and die. If you have heard that phrase more recently than reading this book, you can let us know, or any other concluding thoughts on this here text that we will wrap up presently. And Saturday Night Live did so much mockery of Maya Angelou, we will get even more SNL racist chicanery. The last segment, Katherine Massey Book Club, The Heart of a Woman, SNL, and then we'll resume in chapter 19.
And now, Maya Angelou for Pennzoil Motor Oil.
The Pharaoh, the Serpentine Nile, Grecian grottos marked by eons passing Pennzoil. The choice of champions. Rick Mears, 4-time Indy winner. Oh, magic shining ewer of liquid ball bearings, battling armies of viscosity and thermal breakdown. Pennzoil, change oil. Every 5,000 miles. Keep out of reach of children. Pennzoil is a registered trademark. Freedom.
This has been Maya Angelou for Pennzoil Motor Oil.
The visitors came together. There was a tall, thin Yoruba man and his Canadian wife who were introduced as Richard and Ellen, a South African man whose name I could not decipher, and 3 black Americans. Frank, with his copper-toned skin, smile of space teeth, and merry eyes, hugged us as if we were cousins. Vicky Garvey was short, pretty. Her black hair lay in soft curls, and she shook hands firmly and spoke directly. Alice Wyndham took my heart the moment I saw her. She spoke in a Midwestern accent and laughed as if she had a small cough. Her skin was dark brown dusted black, and her black eyes looked bluntly unblinking. She had the prettiest legs I've ever seen. We drank the brought gin, and I told them what I knew about Egypt. When I started talking, I noticed that because of my friends. And my husband, I knew more about Liberia, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Tanzania than I knew of Cairo. They were all interested in politics, and when they began speaking of Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, the Osajifo, their eyes glistened and their speech was filled with glowing compliments. Why are you going to Liberia? It's backward. Stay in Ghana. Alice's question and invitation were seconded. Yes, Ghana is the place. Kwame Nkrumah is man past man. Iron cut iron. Guy caught on and explained. He is a man who surpasses other men. An iron so strong that it cuts iron. Frank clapped Guy on the shoulder. You're smart, little brother. I'm glad you're going to stay, at least. Vicky asked if I knew Julian Mailed and if I knew that he and his wife lived in Accra. Julian, James Baldwin, Rosa Guy, John Killens, and I had spent many nights until dawn, arguing, drinking, explaining, and complaining in Paul Marshall's apartment. Alice said I had been invited to Julian's house the next evening. Richard and Ellen added little to the general conversation except to invite me and Guy to a picnic 2 days later. They said everyone would be there. The man hadn't charmed me, and his wife was dry as old bread. I declined their offers, saying we were too tired. But Guy spoke up. Mother has spoken for herself. I'll be happy to go. Everyone in the room, including me, knew that I had been out of line. My son was bigger than anyone there and nearly grown, and I had acted as if he were still a little boy. In the silence in which I left them, Richard, Ellen, and Guy made their arrangements. They could come by early in the morning of the picnic. He didn't need to bring anything. All he had to do was be ready. Frank promised to come and take me and Guy to Julian's house the next day. When they all left, I was a little envious. They were in an exciting country at an exciting time. Kwame Nkrumah was the African hero. He had wedded Marxism to the innate African, socialism, and was as loved by black people all over the world as he was hated and feared by whites in power. But Joe Williamson had called in Des to get me a job in Monrovia, and I had given my word that I would go there and make him proud. I couldn't change my fate. Julian Mayfield had the looks to utter a young girl's heart. He was tall, broad, black, witty, handsome, and was married. And Olivia Cordero Mayfield was a small, dark-eyed, beautiful Puerto Rican medical doctor who was as opinionated as a runaway train on a downhill slope. Our reunion was feverish with greetings and news. We retold old stories and exchanged new tales. And Olivia gave me the names of people to see at the university. Julian promised to accompany me to the offices. We ended the evening howling at Julian's outguessing the American vigilantes and making his circuitous way to African asylum. The crowd found Guy's importuning intelligence amusing, although I did not, and Julian said I could go to Liberia with a free mind. He would keep an eye on my son. He added, "Now listen, boy, Ghanaian young folks call everybody 6 months older than themselves Andy or Uncle. I'll look after you, but big and rusty as you are, don't you ever make the mistake of calling me Uncle Julian. I'll be your big brother, and that's all." We all laughed and hugged and chose hours and dates to meet again. Frank deposited us at Walter's. Guy and I said curt good nights. I had been less than pleased at his arrogant insistence into the adult conversation. He was displeased at my displeasure. When I awakened the next morning, his bedroom was empty. Richard and Ellen had gathered him for their picnic, and Walter had left the house. I spent the day examining Guy's clothes, separating the things which could be mended, setting aside the jeans which were only good for dust cloths. I hung up his 2 good suits in preparation for our trip to the university. I only unpacked dresses and my underclothes. I would be leaving in such a short time, I would save the African 3-piece outfits Bandy had given me. She had vouched that by wearing them, I would travel through Liberian society as a Liberian. I cooked, ate, folded clothes, read the titles in Walter's bookcase until dark. At about 6 o'clock, I began to feel uncomfortable, edgy. I felt as if I had forgotten a commitment or stepped on and crushed some precious thing. I went into the kitchen and found Walter's bottle of gin. I was accustomed to drinking in company, but drinking alone had never appealed to me. I poured a small jelly glass to the rim with gin. I was sipping the strong liquor when the doorbell rang. Alice Wyndham stood on the steps with Frank standing behind her. "Hey, Maya, I guess we're first. The rest will be here in a little while." I admitted them into the house and poured glasses of fruit juice, since neither of the two drank alcohol. I saw my gin glass was empty and refilled it. We sat relaxed in the living room. Frank, unable to keep his eyes from Alice's face or body or legs, talked about the picnic in episodes. Plenty food. Lots of good food. Right, Alice? She didn't quite smile, just adjusted her jaw muscles and showed a little teeth. Folk enjoyed themselves, had a good time. Right, Alice? She offered another friendly grimace to the room. I asked, "What time do you think Guy will come home?" Alice answered, "We passed them at Winneba. Richard got drunk at the picnic, so Guy was driving. They should be here in the next few minutes." My mind adapted to her statement. If Guy was driving, everything was all right. His first driving lessons had been taken in a tired Citroen along the crowded streets of Cairo. There was no question that he could handle a car. Tires gusted on the driveway. Alice said, "Here they are. They've arrived." The old Arkansas Toby, unimpressed by Span Oceans, quivered under my skin. I rose immediately and went to Guy's room and collected his passport. Across the tiny hall, I found my passport and money and waited while Alice opened the door. A short exchange of mumbles wavered down the passageway. Suddenly, a voice cut through. "Where is his mother? Isn't his mother here?" I slid our passports and the English pounds I had collected into my bra and stepped out into the hall. Ellen was in the living room, tousled and covered with blood. When she saw me, she screamed. "Maya, it wasn't our fault. Nobody else was hurt, and anyway, he's still alive." I understood every word and intent of her hysteric speech, and continued walking until I stood close to her red-spotted face. I came from a race used to violence and habituated to loss. "Where is my son, Ellen? I need to go there now." I used the control I remembered in my grandmother's voice when she heard of a lynching. Ellen was sobbing on Alice's shoulder. "He's in Coral Boo Hospital," but I swear he was still breathing. When we got into the car, I asked Ellen to stop whimpering. It was neither her life nor her son. We rode to the hospital quickly and in a quiet broken only by Ellen's intermittent snuffles and snorts. Coral Boo's emergency ward was painfully bright. I started down the corridor and found myself in a white tunnel, interrupted by a single loaded gurney resting against a distant wall. I walked up to the movable table and saw my son stretched his full length under white sheets. His rich golden skin paled to ash gray. His eyes closed and his head at an unusual angle. I took my arm away from Alice's grasp and told Katie to stop her stupid snuffling. When they backed away, I looked at my son, my real life. He was born to me when I was 17. I had taken him away from my mother's house when he was 2 months old, and except for a year I spent in Europe without him, and a month when he was stolen by a deranged woman, we had spent our lives together. My grown life lay stretched before me, stiff as a pine board, in a strange country, blood caked on his face and clotted on his clothes. Richard came up behind me and grabbed my shoulders. I turned and nearly suffocated in the breath of old whiskey and rotten teeth. Maya, it was not my fault. He slurred the words out of wet, dripping lips. My control, Ed. I reached for him, for his throat, his eyes, his nose. But before I could get my hands on him, I felt hands stroking my back, holding my waist. Sister, please. Please. Exercise patience. I turned to see a strange couple, old and sweet, faced with wisdom. They continued. This is your son. I nodded. Sister, we found him on the side of the road. We brought him to C.O.W.S. Their kindness cracked my armor. I screamed and they gathered me in their arms. Sister, look at him. He's still breathing. They forced me to face the long body and I saw the chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. Sister, please say thanks to God. The woman still held my waist and the man held my hands. He was hit by a truck. His car was stopped. The motor was out. If he had been moving, your son would be dead. We arrived and the folks in the car had pulled him out and laid him beside the road. We saw the wreck and picked him up and brought him to C.O.W.S. Now thank God that he's alive. I looked over at my unconscious son and said, I thank God, and I thank you. The couple embraced me and walked over to my baby. A nurse appeared. Who is responsible here? I said, I am responsible. I am his mother. She was efficient and without tenderness. You both are Black American? I nodded, wondering if our place of birth would have as negative an impact in Ghana as our color had in our homeland. She rattled her spiel. He must have X-rays. One of our X-ray technicians is also a Black American. I will call him, but you must register down the hall and make payments at the cashier's desk. I didn't want to leave Guy unattended in the hall. I looked for the Ghanaian couple, but they had disappeared. I'll stay with him, Maya. Alice put her hand on my arm. Her face was just solemn enough to let me know she was serious, but not so gloomy as to add to my building hysteria. I finished the registration and hastened after a line of people who paraded behind my son's gurney, the X-ray technician, and I exchanged names. He pointed the cart on which Guy lay toward a door. We entered. The drunken Richard, his apologetic mousy wife, Alice, and a few whose faces I didn't know, lounged against the wall. The technician dismissed all the visitors except Alice and me. I'll need someone to hold him and to position him. He's unconscious, but I've got to X-ray his whole body. Alice and I slid Guy's heavy body onto a new table. We shifted him, turned him, placed his arms neatly at his sides, arranged his legs, positioned his head until every inch of his body had been exposed to the baleful eye of the X-ray machine. We pushed him back onto the rolling tray, and I asked the technician to step aside. How long will he be unconscious? I can't tell you. I think he's in shock, but he may be in a coma. The picture will be back tomorrow. Come back in the morning. Maybe there'll be some news. 2 nurses met us at the door and wheeled Guy quickly down the hall. I started to follow, but Alice touched my arm. Let them have him. They'll make him comfortable. That's their business. I watched the gurney disappear, carrying away the closest person in the world to me. I went back to Walter's house and made a pot of coffee. I drank cup after cup, cooling the boiling liquid with gin. Alice went home, Walter went to bed, but at dawn I found a phone directory and called a taxi. In the clear day, the hospital looked like a normal hospital. I was shown to Guy's room, he recognized me, and my spirits soared. Hi, Mom, what happened? His voice was faint and his skin the color of a hothouse lemon. I told him about the accident, but before I could finish the story, he had drifted back into unconsciousness. I sat for an hour, willing him to awareness, wiping his face with the edge of his pillowcase, worrying if he was going to die, and wondering how I could go on, where I could go, what I would have to live for if he died. A doctor met me outside the room. You are Mrs. Angelou? I had written my old name on the admission form. Yes, doctor. How is he? Will he live? He has a broken arm, broken leg, and possible internal injuries. But he is young. I think he will come through. I spent the day in Guy's room watching him slide in and out of consciousness. When I took a taxi to Julian's house, it was because the nurses had pointedly asked me to leave. Visiting hours were posted and everyone had to observe them. And Olivia opened the door and I collapsed in her arms. She had heard about the accident, and when the hysteria dissipated, she said that although she was not assigned to Coralbu Hospital, she would make a visit to Guy that evening. I should go get a night's sleep. She dropped me at Walter's house. The door leading to Guy's room looked ominous. Still, I knocked, hoping to hear him say, "Yes, Mom. I'm busy. I'll be out in a minute." I turned and sat down on my borrowed bed. The next thing I knew, Walter was shaking my shoulder. "Sister Maya. Sister, Dr. Cordero is on the telephone." I followed him, fumbling my way down the hall. I didn't know any Dr. Cordero, nor did I recognize the man who awakened me or even the house I was reeling through. "Hello, Maya Angelou here." That was the way Vuz answered the phone, with his full name. "Maya, it's an Olivia. I had some new x-rays done. They've been developed. I'm at Coralbu now. The accident was more serious than the other doctors thought. Guy's neck is broken. The crash, my pale son, his awful clammy skin, my love for him, all rushed into my brain at once. In 3 places. I have ordered him moved. He is going to be put in a body, arm, and leg cast. Are you there, Maya?" I was nowhere. Certainly nowhere I had ever been before. I said, "Yes, of course." She explained that she had contacts at a military hospital, and when the plaster hardened, he would be taken there. He was quite tense, so it was better that I held on my visit until he calmed down. I said, "I'm on my way." She meant well, but she didn't know my son. She didn't know the cocky boy who had to live daily with his father's rejection, or the young man who had lived with the certainty of white insolence and the unsureness of moving from school to school, coast to coast, and was made to find his way through another continent and new cultures. A person whose only certitude lay in the knowledge that Mom, effective or not, was never too far away. "I'm on my way." I waited in the halls and yard and canteen of the hospital while the plaster hardened, then joined my son in the ambulance for his transfer. The still damp cast emitted a sour odor, but my sedated son looked like a pale yellow angel in a long white gown. Chapter 20. Accra became a wondrous city as Guy's health improved. The sprawling Makola market drew me into its heaving perfumed bosom and held me there for hours. Black women, sitting before stalls, offered for sale peanuts, peanut butter, wax-printed cloth, cutlery, Pond's face cream, tin milk, sandals, men's pants, hot pepper, pepper sauce, tomatoes, plates, palm oil, palm butter, and palm wine. The open-air shopping center, alive with shouted language and blaring music, its odors and running children, its haggling customers and adamant saleswomen, made America's great department store seem colorless and vacant by contrast. I walked around and around Flagstaff House and the Parliament, where black people sat debating the future plans for their own country. I felt heady just being near their power. When Guy was out of danger, I wrote to Mother. I told her of the accident and explained that I had held a writing because there was nothing she could have done except help me to worry. She sent me a large sum of money and said if I wanted her to come, she'd be in Africa before I knew it. Guy would be in the hospital for 1 month, then he'd have to recover at home for 3 months. I moved into the Yucca and wrote to Joe and Banny Williamson. Going to Liberia had to be canceled. I would find a job and stay in Ghana. And Olivia allowed me to use her kitchen to cook daily meals for Guy. I hitchhiked, found rides, or took the Mammy Lorry, a jitney service to the hospital. My money was leaking away and I had to end work. Guy would be released and I had to have a home for him to come to. Julian suggested that I meet Efua Sutherland, poet, playwright, and head of Ghana's theater. She received me cordially. We sat under a fixed awning at her house, drinking coffee and looking out on the grassy slope of her inner compound. Yes, she had heard of me, and she knew of my son's accident. This was Africa. News traveled. Efua was black and her slim body was draped in neat white linen. In repose, her face had the cool beauty found in the bust of Nefertiti, but when she smiled, she looked like a mischievous girl who kept a delicious secret. I explained my need for work and listed my credentials. She arranged for me to meet Professor J.H. Nikisha, ethnomusicologist and head of the Institute of African Studies. Dr. Nikisha called his staff together, Joseph D. Groff, professor of drama, Bertie Akpoku, dance professor, and Grace Nuama, dance mistress. He introduced me and said they would talk together and let me know very soon. Efua phoned before the week was out. I had a job at the University of Ghana as administrative assistant. Since I had no academic degrees, I couldn't be processed through the usual channels, which meant that I could not expect to receive the salary other foreigners were paid. I would be paid as a Ghanaian, which was a little more than half the foreign wage. I was later informed that non-Ghanaians received more money because they had to pay twice as much as nationals for everything. I tried to speak, but Efua continued. An instructor we know is on leave for 6 months. We have arranged for you to have his house. I cried out gratefully and Efua's cool voice brushed my ear. Sister, I am a mother too. She hung up. I collected the trunk which I had left at Walter's, the suitcases I had stowed in the Yucca storeroom, and the bag I had been living out of, and moved into a nicely furnished house on campus. When I picked up Guy from the hospital, he reminded me of a big tree about to fall. He had grown another inch and put on a few pounds from inactivity. The cast, which covered his head and spread out over his shoulders like a monk's cowl, was gray with dirt, but he had to wear it another 3 months. We celebrated his homecoming with roast chicken and dressing, our favorite food. He was in high spirits. He had lived, and Olivia said he was mending well. He'd made a few friends in the hospital, and soon he'd be enrolled in the university. The next day, I took his diploma and report cards to the registrar's office and was told bluntly that my son could not enter the university. He was not qualified. The University of Ghana had been modeled on the British system. Students had to have completed the 6th form, or as Americans call it, junior college. I was dismissed peremptorily. That was unacceptable. Guy had been through as much as I could handle. Connor Cruz O'Brien was vice chancellor of the university, and Nana Kabina Netsia IV, a paramount chief, was former vice chancellor. I made an appointment to see Dr. O'Brien, and Efua introduced me to the Nana. I pleaded and talked, moaned and whined, said I wasn't asking for a scholarship or any financial aid. I would pay tuition and for his books. After weeks of haunting the offices, collaring the men in halls, catching up with them on the campus paths, I was finally told that they had decided it was not fair to penalize students coming from American schools. They had arranged a 3-part test. Guy would be expected to take the examination on Monday at 9 o'clock. I took Guy the news, and since I hadn't told him of the trouble, he took it casually. Okay, Mom, I'll be ready. Monday morning, my desk felt like sponge and the papers on it were unintelligible. I looked at my watch every V minutes. Efua passed and stopped to chat, but I was too distracted to keep up my end of the conversation. At last, Guy came lopping across the campus, his cast helmet looking almost white under the noonday sun. I forced myself to remain seated. He entered my tiny office, taking up its spare room. Finished. His complexion looked healthy, and his eyes were free of worry. How did you do? Great. I won't get the results for a couple of days. But I did great. Mom, do you know that Connor Cruz O'Brien is the same man who headed the UN Congo project? I knew. Well, one of my questions was, what role has the European and African development? He chuckled with pleasure. Well, I'll tell you. I ate Dr. O'Brien up in little pieces. I read his book to Katanga and back in Cairo. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. I'm going to meet some guys in the junior common room. Speechless, I watched him bound away. I had timed, muled, and begged to get him registered, and in an attempt to show how manly he was, the smartest had bungled everything. I allowed myself to relish the fury. After an hour, when I could walk without my knees wobbling and speak without yelling, I crossed the campus and found Dr. O'Brien in the senior common room. I grinned for him and was prepared to shuffle and scratch. My people had written the book on dealing with white men. I spoke out of a mealy mouth. Dr. O'Brien, Guy told me how he answered one of those questions. You haven't had a chance to see his exam yet. Oh, but I have, Miss Angelou. His answers are fine. His registration papers will be sent to your office. We want minds like that in the university. I grinned again and backed away. Sooner or later, I was going to have to admit that I didn't understand black men or black boys, and certainly not all white men. Guy was moving into Mensa Sarba Hall. I had seen his room in the dormitory, and it looked too small and too dark, but he loved it. For the first time in his life, he was going to live alone, away from my persistent commands. Responsible to himself and for himself. My reaction was in direct contrast with his excitement. I was going to be alone, also for the first time. I was in my mother's house at his birth, and we had been together ever since. Sometimes we lived with others or they lived with us, but he had always been the powerful axle of my life. He dragged the old trunk toward the door, but I stopped him. Don't lift heavy things like that. You could hurt yourself. I want you to be careful. Remember your neck. He put the trunk down and turned. Mom, I know I'm your only child and you love me. His face was quiet and his voice calm. But there's something for you to remember. It is my neck and my life. I will live it whole or not at all. He pulled me to him and wrapped his arms around me. I love you, Mom. Maybe now you'll have a chance to grow up. A car horn honked outside. Guy opened the door and called. Come on in. I'm ready. Two Ghanaian young men leaped on the porch, shouting, and blustered into the room. When they saw me, they composed themselves. I offered them a drink, a beer, some food. I wanted to delay the departure. All refused. They had to return the car to their uncle, and Guy had to begin his new life. They shared Guy's possessions, trundling the boxes, grips, and trunk into a new Mercedes-Benz. Guy gave me one more squeeze, then they piled into the car and drove away. I closed the door and held my breath, waiting for the wave of emotion to surge over me, knock me down, take my breath away. Nothing happened. I didn't feel bereft or desolate. I didn't feel lonely or abandoned. I sat down, still waiting. The first thought that came to me, perfectly formed and promising, was, at last, I'll be able to eat the whole breast of a roast chicken by myself.
And now, Maya Angelou for Fruit Loops.
Toucan Sam, you leap on the back of the wind. Lodestone to assorted fruit flavors. Phoenix of the dawn's wan smile. We gave you, Toucan Sam, life. You, Toucan Sam, give us loops of fruit. Fruity loops. Fruit Loopies, swimming in the churning, frothy mother sea of milk. Kellogg's appreciates consumer comments. P.O. Box 221, Battle Creek, Michigan, a prism of fruity color. A cornucopia of over 40 fruity tastes. The orange, the apple, the grape, the pomegranate, the quince, the kumquat, the kiwi, the plantain, the...
This has been Maya Angelou for Fruit Loops.
Katherine Massey Book Club. New book next week. New book, but we're all done here. If you have thoughts, observations, comments, closing thoughts, gonna get me some stuff tonight. The number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Let us know if you closing thoughts, takeaway points that you will take forth with this here text. Let us know, and we will do it up new book next week. I'll finish up our emails as well for, let's see, this here week. Let's see, email number 1 that I did not get to wrap up. Okay. Number 3. Oh, no, we already got that one. Number 4, Kwame Nkrumah was the African hero. He was I read that one. 5, Richard got drunk at the picnic. There we go. So guy was driving. Richard came up behind me and grabbed my shoulders. I turned and nearly suffocated in breath of old whiskey and rotten teeth. It was not my fault. Sure, maybe Richard was not directly responsible since the car was stopped and guy was hit by a truck. But it is so irresponsible to have a kid who was a new driver in a country that he was unfamiliar with driving because you had to get you some stuff tonight. Logical. Now, I could see maybe if everybody is sober and young guys say, hey, man, I'm learning to drive, and I already been driving here. Come on, rich man, let me drive, man. You got this fly ride. Let me drive. Let me get, come on. Now, if it had been that circumstance, totally different. I'm not smelling your whiskey breath. He was 10 and 2. He was safe. He was everywhere he was supposed to be, and just, because accidents do happen. But, man, I had to get me some stuff tonight, and that's why my son ended up driving and almost died, literally got his neck broken. That's black culture. Buckle up. Let's see. He must have x-rays. One of our x-ray technicians is also a black American. I will call him, but you must register down the hall and make payments at the cashier's desk. Something to think about when traveling to underdeveloped countries, so-called. There is no safety net and don't often accept insurance. They want payment up front, is my understanding. For sure, something to think about when you travel. 7, how long will he be unconscious? I can't tell you. I think he's in shock, but he may be in a coma. The picture will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow? Even though this was decades ago, this is like 1960s, so about 60 years ago, thereabouts. I don't think getting x-ray results the next day would have been standard in the U.S. Probably not, but this is, hey, the back of the bus, like you're lucky if you get x-rays at all. 8, Maya, it's Anna Levia. I have some new x-rays done. They've been developed. I'm at Corley-Boo now. The accident was more serious than the other doctors thought. Guy's neck is broken, so the original x-rays were of probably poor quality. Hey, I said you're lucky to get x-rays at all, right? Yes? Dikembe Mutombo said that. Yes? Chapter 20. Going to Liberia had to be canceled. I would find a job and stay in Ghana. I had a job at the University of Ghana as administrative assistant. Since I had no academic degrees, I couldn't be processed through the usual channels. Impressive how she is able to go from job to job with ease in different countries, no less. Hey, if you can get some folks, make friends, good reputation, and consistently, I think we pointed this out before, it's not like she gets these old jobs and, I'm just putting my feet up, on the desk, kick it, polish my, buff my nameplate 50 times a day. It's like, no, she is on the grind. Like, if I did get this job, and I might not know how to do this job, I'm going to learn how to do this job. I'm going to put the time in. If I have to find some books, go to the library, if I have to annoy somebody, but I'm going to figure out what I need to learn so I can keep this job. I think that is super admirable. That right there, that's something you can promote. Black culture. But I don't hear them say that. Let's see. 2. I love you, Mom. Maybe now you'll have a chance to grow up. The first thought that came to my perfectly formed and promising was, at last I'll be able to eat the whole breast of roast chicken by myself. Interesting comment by Guy. Maybe some underlying resentment for his chaotic upbringing, including almost being killed. I kind of thought the same thing, like, ugh, whence? I don't know what circumstance where you could take that and be like, hey, I'm supposed to be telling you to go. You don't tell me. What you mean? Let me grow up, man. What you? Oh, I guess I did get my neck broken, and you left me with all these strangers, and yes. Children having children. Anywho, let's see. Oh, we got that. Okay. Got that email all finished up. Email untiljustice@gmail.com. The number 605-313-5164. The code 564943 # press star 61 if you would like to participate. I will say, incidentally, those Saturday Night Live skits, they call her Angelou. They have her peddling Fruit Loops. Not to mention, like I said, to have all these black males. Even with David Alan Grier, and I think that was David Alan Grier who did the last two segments that we heard, the Fruit Loops and Pennzoil. And so they had David Alan Grier. He had to put on 3 different dresses to do 3 different skits on Dr. Maya Angelou, all on the same episode. Fuller. But that shows, that's what I said, like they couldn't think of us as anything but buffoons. Angelou, that's what they called her, name calling, and they're talking about her. These skits are from like 2013, 2014, Obama presidency, and at this point she has a doctorate. She's been teaching at Wake Forest at this point for decades and published all these books and spoke at the inauguration of President Clinton, and she's a buffoon, a clown. They even have skits where she is a clown, where she's just pulling pranks on Morgan Freeman and such. Like, that's what they think of us. Even the best of Dr. Maya Angelou. And some of these skits were the year that she passed away, and they're doing these skits. Anyhoodles, let's see. Folks who dialed in, Octavius in New York, if you had commentary, I'll see if other folks have thoughts, and then get some closing thoughts in for The Heart of a Woman.
Hello? Yes, last couple of lines, man. You can hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the last couple of pages here, you covered some of it already, but the drinking it's hard to ignore. I mean, I've been kind of like not commenting on it for the most part, but it's almost every chapter, if I'm correct. Like every chapter is a drink, and right here kind of made me think she had a problem on page 323, where she was like, "It's about 6 o'clock. I began to feel uncomfortable, edgy. I felt as if I had forgotten a commitment or stepped on and crushed some precious thing. I went into the kitchen and found Walter's bottle of gin, and she just started drinking." And it's just like, I mean, there was no reason for her to be drinking, but I think some of it, I mean, when I listen to some of the way she writes and you go into the trauma, and just on the next page, 2 pages over, 325, where she finds out the situation with her son, Guy, that just the trauma responses and even the response to the situation that's traumatic is like, it wasn't my fault. Nobody else was hurt in any way. He's still alive. I understood every word and intent of her hysteric speech and continued walking until I stood close to her red-spotted face. I came from a race used to violence and habituated loss. Like, damn. And then the following lines are even worse, where is my son, Ellen? I need to go there. I used the the control I remembered in my grandmother's voice when she heard of a lynching. Like, that's how she controlled her voice. That's the thought that came to her mind. It's just you could tell, like, I mean, you can understand why she drinks so much to some degree with that amount of trauma. Some people can hack it, and some people drink. And I did mention it last week about Guy and his situation, and I think it's extremely important. And on page 330, this was a real quick summary that just doesn't sound good at all. And this is the reason why, like I said earlier, I was finally glad to hear that there was some kind of focus on Guy and getting him an education and putting him into a space where he could be comfortable and settled to some degree. Just thinking about him in general, to me, and this paragraph spoke a lot. It said, she meant well, but she didn't know my son. She didn't know the cocky boy who had lived daily with his father's rejection, or the young man who had lived with the certainty of white insolence and the unsureness of moving from school to school, coast to coast, and was made to find his way through another continent and new cultures. The person whose only certitude lay in the knowledge that mom, effective or not, was never too far away. Like, and that last line, mom, effective or not, was never too far away. And then the last line he says to her is, you just mentioned, it is definitely cringeworthy. Like, this is not something you want your son to say to you. I love you, mom. Maybe now you'll have a chance to grow up. Huh? Like, for real, man? Like, I have to admit that was a tough line to listen to. And because that in itself speaks volumes of his awareness. There's a level of awareness that he has. I think that's, or maturity, I should say, that's definitely far more mature for his age. And his understanding of where his mom's space is and where she is, and just going like, yeah, you need to get, basically it's like somebody telling you, hey, you need to get your act together. I'm going to leave now so you can go and get your act together. But that was a tough line to read as a parent. I will say this, I do agree with what was stated earlier, which is I got to give her credit for so much of the work as far as being able to also go to these different places, land a job, focus in and hone her skills and really be good at that job. And it's a consistent theme throughout the book, and it just makes you like your head rattle because I mean I don't know if in these days and times that's something easy to do right now. You know, I've never been on the go so much as she has, but it's commendable. I got to give her credit for that because that definitely shows a level of determination and skill. That said, I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Much obliged, Octavius in New York. I don't know, maybe we have other parents, they'll hear the archive or what have you, and maybe there is a non-cringe-worthy way to take that line and just think, oh, this is just constructive, and, they want me to have free time. Hey, we're all still learning, right? Spirit of Fuller, so just, hey, now you can continue to just have that youthful enthusiasm and curiosity about the world, and, that's about the best I could spin it, but I just have to. She did have him at 17, so children having children, yes. Much obliged, Octavius in New York. I'll get some of my thoughts in *61 if you have closing thoughts, all done with Dr. Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman. Let's see. Wait a minute. When I do have to make sure that I when she has this, whatever we want to call it, about having to go and get her son registered at the school over across the continent. Like, I think she had said that her people had written the book on dealing with white people. I have to go back and make sure that I get it correctly, but oh, there it is. My people had written the book on dealing with white men. Now, even that, we've been on the air for 16 years, context of white supremacy. This month, 16 years, and of that 16 years, we have had the Katherine Massey Book Club for 13 of that 16 years, dating back to 2012. So, man, we have been committed to reading, not just, in talk and speech saying reading like Dr. Welsing, but no, going out and actually reading and hopefully applying, remembering. It's not like we read, Richard, any of the books that we Delectable Negro, and They're Forgotten, Never Mentioned Again, Minister Malcolm X's autobiography, which we read, and the other books generally try to remember them and incorporate, the material that we picked up in the reading. But man, my people had written the book on dealing with white men. For our 16 years, I have emphasized racist woman, this book here, The Heart of a Woman, racist woman, racist man, racist child. This has been one of our enormous errors, really, for as long as I can remember. White men, the man, white men, white men, white man, white patriarchy. White people do a lot of encouraging this, especially now, white feminists and all the rest of it, but you can't have a system of white supremacy racism without white women, white men, and white children. Now, even for the my people had written the book on dealing with white men, who are you talking about? What book is this? Where is this book? Do you all know what this book she's talking about? I know it's not Neely Fuller Jr.'s code book, because that didn't exist at the time that she penned this. So what book is she talking about? I would like to read that. I can only chalk that up to, man, we do a lot of this, pretending that we are more informed about racism, white people. Again, Fuller says the most familiar mystery. Has that changed since she wrote this book? I don't think so. The most familiar mystery. Even 2025, if I move Neely Fuller Jr.'s book to the side, let's say move Dr. Welsing's book to the side too. Now, what book is, oh yeah, now that brother, that sister, they wrote the book on Whitey. Maybe Urugu, we put that in, maybe, but I mean, we generally don't even focus on white people. We do what she said. She said, I don't even find white people interesting. I don't want to talk. She said that at the beginning of the book. Remember, she was talking about the killings, like they're in New York and talking about whitey this and white crackers that and white people racist this. And I'm not even, that's most non-white people. Every other interest but the most familiar mystery, the people who dominate the whole universe. Any hoodles. Let me back up to 19 to where I just could not get out of the book before. Like, did she say our people wrote the book on whiteness? Like, what? Anyway, I thought that was a great point. Oh, and that was too when he said, I went into the kitchen and found Walter's bottle of gin. I was accustomed to drinking in company, but drinking alone had never appealed to me. I poured a small jelly glass to the rim with gin. Like sometimes just oh, well, we just drink because he said every chapter. I've said it's on every page. It's on every page. It doesn't matter whether it's good times, bad times, something awful happened, my son almost died, divorce, anything. We just heard Dr. King. Let's go to get a drink. How are we going to raise money for the fundraiser for the SCLC? Let's go get a drink. Is the guy going to get out the hospital? Let's go get a drink. Like, what? I mean, come on, man. Come on. One, I think he said alcoholism. Is that a problem here? Is that what's? Maybe. And even on the continent, that is, even with Lumumba, he worked at a brewery. He was doing a lot of organizing, like, come, let's get a sip and talk about white supremacy. And that did help organize to a degree, but I mean, dang, can we not do that? Can we put the gin down just for, like, maybe Guy wouldn't have broke his neck if Richard didn't have to have a sip. Maybe. I bet you it seemed like Dr. Angelou agreed with me on that one. Almost killed my child because you got to have a sip. Just a little sip. Just a little sip. Like, come on, man. Come on, man. Sobriety would be, for this Negro History Month, man, sobriety would be best. We need our brain computer and all of it. Let's see. That's another one. She said, I came from a race used to violence and habituated to loss. Like, wow. I mean, if that's, hey, I'm from the victims of white supremacy. That's my race. Only one race, the white race. So I'm from the group victims of white supremacy, and all we know is being mistreated. That's true. But that also would be Negro culture, right? Ew. I even have to pause. Let me get my water. Give me one. I didn't have my water because I was drinking tea happily for the broadcast, and I had a smoothie. Anywho, I pointed out at the beginning, we heard from Guy in the intro, he is pale. He has a white parent, which he commented on. And I don't even think she uses white in the book. I think in this text she says Greek. And I said, Bakari Henderson, don't be deceptive with me. If you married a white fella, come on, man. You heard all this in Zebra Murders, too, about Greek white people. Come on, man. But I said, man, if some of this is, he's really pale, white parent, if that's some of the difficulties that he has with the savages or whatever else and why he has to fight so much, she should have said that. And even she should have commented on his complexion. She gets so much detail about so many other things. Guy's skin complexion is important before this accident. Now, once we get to the accident, she says his rich golden skin pale to ash gray. Guy is really pale anyway. He is certainly not, and she's talked about these rich, dark, brown, black people all the time. Guy is really pale because he has a white parent, and she gives that really short shrift in the book. Let's see. When she says, this is the direct next paragraph after the pale ash gray, I had taken him, talking about Guy, from my mother's house when he was 2 months old, and except for a year I spent in Europe without him, and a month when he was stolen by a deranged woman, we had spent our lives together. Even that, this book alone, she left him a lot. She disappears, leaves him with some dude that she broke up with. He abandons him too, which, I mean, hey, your mom dumped me, like, why am I got things to do and find me a new girlfriend or whatever. So he's there by himself, could have been stolen by a social worker or whatever. Like, is that true? Like, it seems like you did a lot of, gallivanting and running around and going hither and yonder. Let's see. Even that gave me pause too. Like, is that part about the deranged woman kidnapping him? Is that in autobiography book number 2 or 3 that we didn't read? Get a little bit further down. She says, I watched the gurney disappear, carrying away the closest person in the world to me. I went back to Walter's house and made a pot of coffee. I drank cup after cup, cooling the boiling liquid with gin. See what I mean? Like, it's every page. Somebody is drinking and liquoring and going to the bar and wait a minute. See, she doesn't really comment again about Guy is pretty pale. Like, if the other black people that are here, like Dr. King, Booze, Max Roach, the other black people that she comments on and their attractiveness and their dark melanated complexion, Guy doesn't have that. And I'm not ridiculing, I'm just saying the system of white supremacy and the one drop rule and all of the skin trauma that white people have put on us, white people make that an issue. Like, hey, I think Guy could pass the brown paper bag test. And white people say that. Racists say that is important. Make that significant on the plantation. She says, I waited in the halls and yard and canteen of the hospital while the plaster hardened, then joined my son in the ambulance for his transfer. The still damp cast emitted a sour odor, but my sedated son looked like a pale yellow angel in a long white gown. Now, every parent, well, most parents, many parents will think of their child, as angelic or whatever the case may be, and he is about to die, or she thought he could have been about to die and all that, broken neck, really serious. But man, this is the time where we get emphasis on the fact that he is pale and angel God-like. And you can see now how many times this is a white angel, a blonde angel, a pale yellow blonde angel. How frequent and stale is that stereotype? Because God, of course, is also white. But you got black strangers and black death and dark days and black, like, come on, man, come on. That would even be one where I would say, let's pick non-stale metaphors for our descriptors, even for people that we care about a lot. And I mean, hey, if we care about them, we can really strain our brain computer to come up with new and creative ways of articulating our concern, affection. Let's see. So thankfully he gets out of the hospital. Oh man, wait a minute. Whoa. So I said, I think the caller who wrote in too, we both said she wants to send her child to a school system that is free from what she says racial discrimination. And I said, where is that place in the known universe? Let me know. I don't think it exists. We barely get a chapter away, and she says, the next day I took his diploma and report cards to the registrar's office and was told bluntly that my son could not enter the university. He was not qualified. The University of Ghana had been molded on the British system. That right there, you've been influenced by the system of white. You can't even register. We trying to be like the Brits, white folks. And so you can't even register. We don't even think you measure up to standards. Get on out of here. Yeah. I don't know where you can go on the planet and not be influenced, but I could be misinformed. Get my tea one more. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, I got that. My people written the book. And I didn't see her go to this book when Mr. Bernstein, so that's got to be in there, right? It's got to be a whole chapter. So when Whitey is not going to pay you, because we heard that in Andrée Blouin's book last time around too. She made the dress, and the white woman said, I'm not paying you nothing. Sick the dog on it. Yeah, get her. Where is that chapter in the book on Whitey? This is the chapter when Whitey doesn't want to pay you. You do X, Y, and Z, or you say X, Y, and Z, and then you get your nickels, maybe some extra. Where's that chapter at? Why didn't you use it then? At the school. Now, maybe she did use it, but she didn't mention the book of Whitey when the school situation happened. The eviction, for sure, got to be a chapter or two on when Whitey comes to throw you in the street. This is what you do. If there is a book on Whitey, it is really, really lacking, even in 2025. Let's see. She says, sooner or later I was going to have to admit that I didn't understand black men or black boys, and certainly not all white men. What in the world? Like, what in the world? I don't even know too many people who can truthfully say I know myself, much less black men, black boys. And then she said, well, certainly not all. I might know a few white men, but I don't. Like, what in the world? What white men do you think you know well? Even depends on what you mean when you say understand. What white men do you think you understand? Depending on what you mean by understand too, but which white men do you think you understand? I'd like a book on just them specifically, if you please. Mr. Bernstein? Let's see. Oh, and see, that's what I mean. It's every page. So I'm going to see. So that's one. I'm going to highlight. Bang. Let me see. Do I get to go further than a page before drinking comes up again? Let me see. It looks like I can get a page. Not a whole lot. It would probably depend on where in the text you know, are kicking back, but it looks like I got, you know, a page or two without bumping into liquor. I suspect if we were moving back when she was dating Vooz and the bail bondsman and some of these other folks, Billie Holiday, it would have probably been even more current. It would, recurrent in the text. It might have been twice per page because sometimes they were going to the bar and all that repeatedly. But it's such a common part of the book when they come to get Whisk guy off to school. She says, I offered them a drink, a beer, some food, and it wasn't even food first. It was a beer, and they're supposed to go and leave. Now, after all this trouble that we've had with drink driving and all of this, they're going to drive my son, move him. Why are we offering beer? Water. Y'all are dehydrated anyway. We're on the count. Water, non-alcohol. You got any more of those virgin pina coladas? Let's do that. Fresh pineapple. Hydrate you. Let's see. Oh, and then I said, now, I told y'all last week, I said it on the compensatory call-in, they had a black female author come to Seattle and speak. Or a non-white female. She has a white parent and a black female. Or white parent, black parent. She told us with a straight face, serious, black culture is, and you won't even know, black culture is fried chicken, afros. Now you want to talk about cringe. And everyone applauded, took it serious. Nobody threw rotten eggs at her or called her a coon or anything like that. Everyone applauded. It was a lot of black people too. They applauded. Right on, sister. Amen. Woo. VGQ. Now, this here book, it started fried chicken for Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday said, and make sure you cook the chicken right, because I don't want no bloody chicken. You in here messing around over no chicken. I'd rather go someplace else. They got a McDonald's around here because you're going to mess the chicken up. And Dr. Angelou got upset and said, look here. You done been insolent, insulted me, upset my child. You don't impugn my fried chicken cooking abilities. And they said, oh, I'm sorry. I just don't like no raw chicken. I'm sorry. I'll behave. I'll be good. Okay. And then they ate the chicken. Said, wow, this chicken show is good. You do a good chicken. So that's how the book started. Yes, fried chicken. The book ends, guy out of here, which he had been gone the whole time. So what? And that might have even fueled his, it's no big deal because I've been on my own the whole time anyway. So, whatever. Whatever. But he leaves and says, wow, I get a whole piece of chicken to myself. Good day. Man, I learned a whole lot from the book and all that, but wow, we did begin and end with chicken. That is what they say about us. Any hoodles. And there we go. I don't know how I would have been impacted because I have the abridged version, meaning they've edited and redacted it, so we'd have to go and look and see what they picked out and everything. I don't know how I would have been impacted if I had heard Dr. Angelou read this. I'll have to process that for another day because the stay black. I don't know how I would have processed all this drinking and drinking and drinking. I'm black and I'm dangerous. Like, I don't know how that would have impacted my brain computer hearing Dr. Angelou read some of the, I don't know, more colorful aspects of this text. But any hoodles, if you check out the shortened version, maybe you can let us know what parts they took out. Did it make a big impact? Like, did they take out some of the parts that we thought were really, it was Saturday night, I'm black and I'm dangerous. Did they take out that? Did they take out some of the other parts of the book that I thought were really important? The Buddy, the rapist, did they leave that in or did they take that out? That sort of thing. Anywho, new book for next week. And in fact, I think I can say it now. So the new book for next week, February 21, Malcolm X was assassinated. Book number 6 in her autobiography series starts immediately with the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, we are cheating because books 5 and 6, she's meeting with Minister Malcolm X on the continent. That would be kind of cool to read about too, but in terms of time and space, we are matched up February with the assassination. That is exactly where book 6 starts at. And I initially thought that Patrice Lumumba's assassination and Minister Malcolm X's assassinations would be in the same book. They are not. That is book 6, titled A Song Flung Up to Heaven, which I also had never heard of until we started reading all of this, nor had I ever seen. I saw the different covers, never seen any of them. That is a very short book, like it will be done super quick, but it starts immediately with the assassination of Malcolm X. It's so short that they do have the audio book. It is unabridged, so we will be able to hear Dr. Maya Angelou tell us about how she learned Minister Malcolm had been assassinated, what were her thoughts, observations. Guy is obviously no longer a child, so I don't even think he's going to be in that book. But that will be our next read, unless something wacky happens between now and next week, just because, hey, February 21, it is that time of year, pay our respects. Plus, she has very important observations for what she saw once she learned that he died, and this news is spreading throughout black people in this part of the world, the U.S. Oh, man. And if people have not read the whole series, maybe they haven't heard. What were Dr. Angelou's observations upon the assassination of Minister Malcolm X? She was back in the States. She was in California, San Francisco specifically, when all this happened. So excited. That, in my opinion, that right there, what she reports, that is Negro culture. Not all this other nonsense and red, black, and green and blah, 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 blah. What she starts off, a song flung up to heaven, Minister Malcolm has been killed. What now? Black culture. That is for next week, unless something really wacky happens. And then Dr. Angelou will have the sole distinction as being the only author. We have read 3 different books in the Katherine Massey book club. Distinction, I guess she probably would be like, whatever. But that'll be true if we read that next week. Anywho, we'll be here tomorrow, neutralizing workplace racism, Friday, compensatory call-in, and Sunday, because of this book, there is a white woman who wrote a whole book about non-white people being forced to be complicit in theatrical acts of white supremacy, like the play The Blacks, a clown show. And she talks about her experience as a white woman going to see this play, and they asked her to perform in blackface and tap dance, and it is wacky. She talks about Maya Angelou's appearance in this play and her writing about this play and all of that. But again, the thrust of her writing is, her supposition is that non-white people, black people, are manipulated, forced to be accomplices in acts of racism by performing in these types of plays. We'll chat about that on Sunday. No Super Bowl to compete with, so easy sailing. Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Much obliged for folks tuned in, hopefully worthy of your time and energy. Maybe learned a little bit. I know I learned a lot. I had no idea the life and times of Dr. Maya Angelou, and she met so many people and did so much, and wow, what an experience. Any hoodles. Next week, more to come. Dr. Angelou will be here tomorrow, neutralizing workplace racism. Sobriety. For this book, say it 2-3 times. Sobriety would be best, and especially if you have offspring. He talked, that interview with Guy Johnson was, man, all these years later, I think by that point he was in his 70s. He might have even been close to 80. He's passed on now, unless I'm mistaken, but he might have been close to 80 by 2014 if he was approximately 13 years old or so. Yeah, he would definitely have been in his 80s by the time that interview took place. So, man, or at least 70s. I'll say that, at least 70s by the time that interview took place in 2014. But, man, I mean, So he, all those years later, Billie Holiday, and she sung Strange Fruit and all the rest of it, and that was cool and impactful and blah, 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 but she's drinking and giving alcohol to the dog, and that is not the way you want people to be talking about and remembering you, and that's not what you want to model for non-white children, victims of white supremacy. Model drinking water and plenty of it. Maybe a little tea, fruit smoothie, no sugar added. Something constructive, healthful, not corn liquor. Any hoodles. We will be here about 24 hours. Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Creator, we ask that you help us demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling. Wait a minute. No name calling other black people. No gossiping, because we heard some of that in the section this week too, along with the name calling, because that goes hand in hand off. And that old coon. No name calling other black people. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Even my conditioning has been conditioned.